What the hell is up, you sons of respectable women? I am here to talk to you about Acropolis number 2. It's episode 69 of Pr0totype. Nice. So Acropolis number 2 is the premier tournament for Cosmonarchy. Well, Acropolis is the series of premier tournaments, and number 2 is exactly where we are at when it comes to the next tournament. We are kicking things off with the Gauntlet Stage, the first of which is going live this weekend, Saturday, the 26th of October. So by the time you hear another episode of Pr0totype, we will already have had some results, some matches played, and of course a couple of additional changes to the game before the matches get played in terms of final balancing and some such. That being said, we are definitely going to cover a lot today in this show. We're going to cover the map pool for Acropolis number 2. We're going to cover some likely matchups that we'll see in that Gauntlet Stage A. And we'll also talk about some of the things that are likely to change, liable to be updated and adjusted balance-wise ahead of the tournament actually kicking off properly. Of course, after that, we'll go over the community roundup and answer some much-needed coffee questions. If you want to donate towards project development for Cosmonarchy, the most ambitious project ever made within StarCraft's engine, and certainly a very exciting deviation from the norm when it comes to RTS content and RTS gameplay, you can go to the coffee link that is now visible in the bottom left of your screen, but also linked in the description of this video, and you can donate towards project development. I hope you will. We definitely appreciate all of the support. That being said, I think it's time to talk about that map pool. So, pictured on your screen is indeed the tournament map pool for Acropolis number 2. You'll note that the aspect ratio is not 16:9, so it is a little bit, not stretched, but like has the black bars and stuff. Of course, if you watch this and you are a fan of not having black bars, you just prefer to bizarrely stretch your screen to the left and right, breaking the aspect ratio of the game, you're a goober. But besides that, of course, I will have to rejig this layout a little bit to actually fit on a 16:9 display. Otherwise, we are going to have some interesting situations. I'll probably just extend it out width-wise, and that'll fix it up on the stream. But I haven't done that yet, so this is what you get. That being said, we are talking Acropolis number 2 here. We are talking about the map pool. We can see here that we have 10 maps and an FFA decider now actually pictured in the graphic. That is because we went from an 8-map pool to a 10-map pool. We have ourselves Demaloon, a port of Overwatch by Jujic. I also did some light touches on it, but really nothing too major. All of the credit really goes for Jujic in that situation. I do touch up all of the maps in some small ways, mostly related to like resource allocation and like the layout of the resources and stuff. We've got Genesis Y by Biddyby. That's a returning map. We actually only have 3 returning maps from previous installments of Cosmonarchy tournaments. Muspelheim by Veek7. This is a map that actually has been around for quite a while. I don't count it as returning because it didn't show up in any tournaments, I don't think. There was actually one tournament, I believe, way back, one of the sort of invitationals that we used, but it wasn't in Tyrant's Tale and it wasn't in Acropolis 1. And so in that sort of vein, since we haven't put those other tournaments on Liquipedia, for example, I think we're good to call this one the debut of it in a premier tournament context. That being said, it has technically been played in some tournament before, and it definitely has been played a decent amount up until this point. It has given some very interesting games. I think adding an extra base into it, the way that Veek did in the sort of late September, definitely improved the map pretty significantly when it comes to those macro games. And so I'm happy to include it here. We've got Near Impact and another original map, Muspelheim, and Genesis Y was technically sort of loosely inspired by, what is it? Not Origin. That's Origin X's Shambler's map, Blitz Y, which is a map that was being played last season of the final season of ASL before it changed names. So Muspelheim is an original map. Near Impact, also an original map, also by Jujic. This is an interesting map that clearly has had a lot of effort put into it when it comes to the visuals, because you have to place all of those tiles in the middle of like all of the asteroid tiles have to be placed manually. And so that to me is a very cool situation. I'll start zooming in a little bit so you guys can see it a bit better. We're talking about Near Impact right now. The one thing that's worth noting about Muspelheim, by the way, is that if you're not familiar with it, it does have the back base here, but it's blocked by a neutral iron foundry, which is not visible in the editor, unfortunately. But that is actually an island base until you blow up the destructible rock equivalent. That being said, the iron foundry is a little bit cheeky because you can infest it as Zerg and then have, tier 3 Terran. Nobody's actually done this successfully to the point where they've actually used it. I think the one time I saw Veek do it on his own map was against Hamster, and Hamster won the game anyway, so it wasn't very consequential. It might have even been like a little bit of a fool's gold option because it's like your units move slower when they're blissfully embraced and stuff. Anyway, that's a little note that you can have about Muspelheim. But Near Impact is a bit more standard in terms of macro. I look at it and I think to myself, you've got your easier easier to access third, but you're still dealing with a pretty wide choke. So actually holding that third is a little bit challenging. When I play this map, as long as I'm not playing as Zerg, as Terran or Protoss, I prefer to actually take the 9 or 3 o'clock bases, because I find those to be more suitable for grabbing that early sort of map presence that you need. And they also do come equipped with double gas. But if you are running a mineral-starved comp, you want to take this third base. It has 2 Vespene ridges and extra mineral fields. I think it's something crazy, like I'm counting 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so there's 10 mineral fields in this base, which is 3 more than your main and 3 more than your nat. So definitely a high yield mineral base that you might want to take early on, depending on your composition. But personally, I tend to try to get out on the map, and there's not that much build space in this 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock position, but it still gives you a little bit more of a foothold out on the map away from your choke. I find that to be very, very useful. As Protoss, you want to do that anyway, because you've got a lot of tempo over your opponent, pretty much no matter what the matchup is, although that will change depending on the stage of the game. But as like Zerg, you might be forced into a more defensive posture where you take your mineral heavy base, and as Terran, you probably want to see if you can secure that. And low build space actually doesn't matter as much for Terran as it does for Protoss, in my opinion, because you can put down a bunch of static defense in this area and kind of call it a day. So I find that to be pretty useful there for Terran as well. All right, so that being said, we're going to move on to... I didn't really spend too much time on Genesis Y because it is a returning map, but it does have the wall assist with the neutral biotic bastions, which are those vestry graphics there, and the naturals. Other than that, it's a fairly straightforward map. It is pretty aggro in terms of the timing. Like, usually this is a map with high action early on. Demaloon is kind of turning into that. I would say it's a standard-ish map as far as the timing goes, but it does lean a little bit more towards high action, faster-paced engagements and such. Again, it's a port of Overwatch, so some people will like that, and some people won't. Of course, I'm glad that we used a better title than Overwatch. Fuck you. But Spinal Tap is a map that I ported. It is a port of Vertebra. It is commissioned by none other than Pr0totype, and this map has been recently adjusted to have prettier tiles in the mains, to be made of grass and stuff. I find that helps me visualize where exactly I am on the map, so that's one of the reasons why I did that. That being said, I also increased the wall assist mineral fields to require 2 returns or 2 harvests to deplete. Previously it was only 1 harvest. I think that's a little bit more. That was it. That was always the intention, but we changed the yields for the new economy and I never updated that. So people were, like it was 8 minerals, and so it would have to go from 8 to 4 and then 4 to depleted. Now it was just going from 8 to 3, which is counting as depleted now. So like we changed how the rules worked, and then it was like, oh wait, I got to fix that. So that was a recent update. It was actually just yesterday that I updated that when I put together the map pool. You'll note that it has this big, ramp complex in the middle of the map. It also has the mineral-only bases that are, I would say, a little bit vulnerable, but definitely, if you can find a way to hold that, I think that's probably your linchpin to taking the other bases in your hemisphere of the map. And so some people will take this, the 3 and 9 positions as their third. Unlike in Near Impact, I find that is a bit of something that like boxes you into your little quadrant a bit more. It doesn't really give you too much animus to go out on the map. And so I typically prefer to take the 12 and 6 if I can, but without taking the mineral only and then like jockeying for position in this general vicinity, where the ramp is associated, like right close to the mineral only, that little high ground there. If you can hold that high ground, you can kind of police both pathways into your upper hemisphere or lower hemisphere. If you take this 3 and 9, it doesn't really, it doesn't change the angle of attack too much, so that can be more defensible, but it doesn't really give you the ability to move out on the map. And I tend to prefer that tempo as a stylistic choice. Obviously you can do whatever. So there's that. Moving over, we do have Rage Slave, a map I'm also ported myself. It's Neo Rush Hour, ported to Cosmonarchy. I did do a decent amount of liberties with this one. It's not quite as faithful as Spinal Tap was. This is a returning map. It was commissioned by Hit 'em Up back in the day. Shout out to Hit 'em Up for doing that. And since this is a returning map, I won't linger the point too long. I will point out that there's 3 neutral geysers. Well, they're all neutral, but 3 geysers in the middle of the map that you can return to a neutral treasury on. If you destroy that treasury, you cannot rebuild a town center there. So that is something that I feel like most people probably didn't realize about this map. But Protoss, for example, can use artisans to return anyway. way. The other races will have to use air workers across the field or something to return, or otherwise distance mine if they want to use these at all. So in that situation, the 3 geysers are mostly useful in the early game, but you could also just shut it out altogether if you're not confident that you're going to be able to get out on the map, or you're Protoss and you don't care because you've got artisans. You might want to blow that up faster, unless you're currently benefiting from it. But other than that, pretty straightforward. Blackwater Bastion by BiddyB, another returning map, the last of our returning maps, actually. Oh no, do we have Paradise here? We do. Okay, so yeah, our 3 returning maps were Genesis Y. I guess we had 4 because of Paradise. So yeah, we had Genesis Y, Rage Slave, Blackwater Bastion, Paradise. So we had 4 returning maps, not 3. That was me being goofy on the miscount there. So Blackwater Bastion comes in, and it is a 4-spot map. The only changes that were made recently were to make the thirds have 7 minerals like the mains and naturals, and then increase the mineral count in the cardinal bases. That was the only change that happened recently, besides like fixing some busted tiles and stuff. So generally speaking, it's going to play out very similarly to how it always did. I think it's always been a pretty good macro-oriented map. Not too much early cheese and shenanigans you can get up to that is anything map specific, and that is in stark contrast to Check Stealer, a port of Kickback. I did this port, and it was also commissioned by Hit 'em Up. I obviously have done some things differently when it comes to the layout. We still have the unbuildable terrain outside of the choke points and stuff that with little pockets of buildability signified by these little black squares of asphalt. And then obviously the visuals are very distinct, but otherwise mostly the same. The center base is an island now. That was an update that I made yesterday. And also one of the things that we've done is adjust this area to have the ramp complex that leads into the 3 and 9 o'clock, which is not present for 12 and 6. One of the other things that I ended up doing for our Cosmonarchy version of lower yield bases is I kept the mineral count at 7 for the naturals, but I only have a geyser, and the minerals are 1,000 resources instead of 2,000, which is the new standard as of yesterday as well. Mineral fields will take longer to deplete than they did before, but except for on Check Stealer, where the naturals, the safe in bases or whatever, are going to be taken care of. By the way, I thought it was really funny. I looked up on how the wording was done on Wikipedia. They don't really have too much quality control when it comes to how people word it. There's no standardization about things. Instead, they just have they call it like baby bases is like the term that they use for these sidings, and that's not exactly how they described it in other maps that had that. So I just thought it was really funny. A little bit of trivia there. I was looking at the way that they described the notable characteristics. We've got another 2 Brood War ports to finish up our situation here. We've got Decapitation, also ported by myself. This one commissioned by 3Crow. Big temple complex in the middle of the map. I tried to make it more obvious that part of the middle was actually buildable. The repeating tile here, the little moire pattern, if you will, is definitely one of those situations where you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, well, that's unbuildable, but the non-repeating tiles are all buildable. And then I wanted to add a little bit more of an obvious signifier that you can actually build up here. So I added the crushed rock very recently. That was also something I did yesterday before migrating it into class 1. It's been tested a lot. People do have some misgivings about the way that, the setup is concerned. I feel like I've looked at a little bit at the way that people have talked about like the ramps and stuff. Cliff advantage is pretty significant when you're up on 2 cliff advantages or 2 cliff levels out of your opponent. So getting contained is definitely something you want to avoid doing if you can, as any race, in any matchup when it comes to this particular map. In my view, that just means that you have to expand sooner, but that obviously does morph your openings. I'm not actually sure that it's impossible to breach a contain on this map. I think it just requires you to be a bit more proactive. And I honestly feel like people should be trying to be more proactive out on the map with, early tier units in Terran versus Protoss, in Zerg versus Terran, in all of these matchups where like one race seems to automatically get the tempo advantage. One thing that you can do to try to negate that is just by taking your early game units and sending them out on the map. Because if you know where your enemy's early military is, it's not really like they can threaten you. And Defender's advantage with your restocking on your military units out of your production structures is high enough that I think you should be able to hold even if your army misses their army. But I've just gotten a lot of success, walking Hurricanes into a Protoss base or whatever in the early stages of the game. And maybe that's probably because I'm the only one who opens stockade sometimes versus some of these people. But either way, it's something that I thought was worth pointing out there. So that being said, we do indeed have a nice 4-spawn map here, Port of Shakura's Temple. Some people think that this map was really busted in Brood War. I actually am not familiar with too many games that were played on it, so I don't really know. But I do like the general flow of the map. As long as you can avoid getting contained, it feels pretty good. And yes, we do have to fix up some tile issues that are in the middle of the map, like where the ramps are meeting and stuff. Hopefully I find the tiles for that or add them otherwise. And then lastly, another returning map, our final returning map. It is Paradise by Biddybe. We have 4-spawn map here, a port of, I believe it's a port of Dante's Peaks, as I'm recalling. That is what Biddybe, this is actually the OG port. Technically, Biddybe made Margarine, which is a port of butter. I think that was before Paradise, and so Paradise came after that. I'm pretty sure if I'm getting the chronology right, but Margarine didn't end up playing as well as Paradise did, and we ended up going with Paradise as a map. Nice to see another 4-spawn map, of course, and I think it's given pretty good games. It is a little bit more aggro than Blackwater Bastion. You compare these two, I think Paradise plays a little bit more high variance, particularly when it comes to the spawns, and that makes sense because the map is actually rotationally symmetric as opposed to XY. So that to me tells me that Paradise will be an interesting map. And lastly, we've got our FFA decider, Excise. This is a map that I made, commissioned by the Shambler way back. This is something that I think is pretty interesting as far as a map goes. I think it was just played earlier today. I don't know how that FFA went, but that was a 4-player FFA, I believe, instead of a 3-player one. The map will be a 3-player FFA if it's ever used for one of the purposes inside the tournament. And I find that to be really exciting as a concept. I don't know how, because the players are not going to be evenly spaced, it'll be interesting to see what that does to the game theory. Do you just rush the person next to you, but risk getting rushed by the other person next to you? Like if you're caught in the middle, that's going to be very interesting. And then also, if you have one of the hemispheres, the left or right hemispheres of the map to yourself, do you just go greedy? But then you could get ganged up on by multiple angles because that would open you up to more threats potentially. So I think there's a lot of interesting things about that. I do think that the middle of the map is going to be an interesting little battleground to fight over. I'm not sure if there's going to be any changes to this map ahead of the tournament, but I think it's salvageable, or rather serviceable enough to be used for that particular purpose. So I am looking forward to seeing if any games do get played on it. I think Shambler was actually legit practicing to see if he would be able to, have a little bit more of a leg up on his opposition if we do get the FFA decider. And you know what? It is the most competitive tournament to date. Therefore, I can see what he's talking about. You might want to actually prepare for that a little bit more heavily. So now you know a little bit about the map pool for Acropolis number 2. Let's move on to talking about some of those matchups that we might get. So what we are seeing right now is the Bracket HQ bracket for Acropolis 2, Gauntlet Stage A. And as you can see, we have a lot of players, actually. We've got 28 players signed up for the Gauntlet. Aoud and Arbuz have not actually sent in their sign-up info, but they've confirmed that they will be playing. Actually, the same is true for the Night Fox. So we'll be getting their official sign-up later on. Also, it's worth noting, the Night Fox may change from Terran, who I've tentatively signed him up as, to Zerg, if he feels like he can get a good grasp on the matchup after doing some grinding. But overall, I feel like, regardless, we've got a very interesting spread of players, actually. Something that I'm always interested in. You can maybe see a little bit more flashbang warning. I should have told you guys. This is the participants list on Wikipedia for the qualifier for Gauntlet Stage A. And to me, I'm looking at this and I'm getting very excited. Like, we do have an overrepresentation of Terrans right now, like an oversaturation of them. That to me is pretty cool because obviously Terrans are struggling versus Protoss and maybe a little bit versus Zerg. Zerg seems to be the one that are the most struggling based on the vocal description or whatever. But I think most people just think Toss is OP. Meanwhile, Head 'em Up is confirmed he's going to be random. Biddybe and Dynaman are being random, etc., etc. So it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening there. I feel like at the level of skill that is likely to be displayed in some of the opening matchups, for the most part, the race imba or whatever shouldn't actually feature into it too much. But it's really cool to see this spread of players. We obviously have a couple of Poles. We've got a man from Chile. We've got a couple of Russians. And of course, we've got... well, I say a couple of Russians. Hamster's not in this list. He would be the other Russian. Obviously, I think Ava is from Australia. They didn't respond to me when I asked them for clarification on that because they didn't put that in their thing, and they obviously need a flag for Wikipedia. But anyway, that's that. We've got a Canadian in Hit 'em Up. In fact, it's a little surprising he's the only Canadian. I feel like that you'd think that we would have more of them. But anyway, we do have that, and of course we have a bunch of Americans, classic. We've got a Venezuelan and Aoud, a German and Benno. It's really cool to see that. A Greek and Arbuz. Like, these are some cool things. Cause Monarchy is truly international. You've got Jackie Langsky as the Filipino representation there. That's pretty epic, dude. So anyway, besides that, we'll go back to the actual bracket, show you guys what's up when it comes to the current seeding of things. And some seeding might end up flip-flopping a little bit here, but I am very much interested in a couple of these matchups. Now, it is a little bit unfortunate that I haven't been able to see some of the newer players practice, or some of the newer players just haven't played that much. Like, I don't know how good K-Dusk is. I don't know how good Bariso is, but I know he's pretty good in StarCraft 1. I think he's like a C-rank Terran now. I have seen Cannoli. I actually don't think that... Cannoli is technically a tournament debutant. I needed to add that little asterisk in there. But besides that... I actually don't think Cannoli is likely to be the worst player here. It's just that he's new. And so when you're new, when you're playing in your debut tournament, you kind of do get like the short end of the stick when it comes to the seeding. That's just sort of the way things go. And it's hard for me to really determine how good somebody is. I'm basing it off of their past experience, or if they've actually played Cause Monarchy, but this is their first time playing in a tournament, which is the case for like Ava and to a lesser extent K-Dusk. Then that's when I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, like, well, I guess I'll put you higher up in the seed, like you'll get the higher seed for the new people or whatever, but that's just based on that. So I actually think, for example, like, even though Cannoli is technically listed as the last seed here, he's not a pushover. He might actually be better than, I would say it's almost likely he would be better than some of those like the lower 20s, right? Like from like, Benno to Lundier, he could probably give those people a run for their money. So seed 18 to 24, you could probably have Cannoli do pretty well versus them. So it's not a slam dunk that whoever draws him is going to have a walkover. And that's very exciting to me. So I wanted to look through the early matchups right now as we see things. We've got Biddy B's random versus Art of Turtle's Zerg. Art of Turtle's been out of the game for a while. I'm not sure how solid he's been playing lately. He said that he was going to try to grind up for it. In that case, Biddy B does have a tough ask ahead of him, but he is a cheese man. He can cheese. You got to watch out for that. Looking at Smarty Cakes versus Lundier. Lundier also a bit of a cheese man, but Smarty Cakes is the favorite seed here. He's been grinding a lot. He's been practicing. He's ready to go. He's happy to just see if he can smash. So as long as he can survive Lundier's cheeses, I actually think he'll comfortably advance 2-0 here. All of these are best of threes for all of the matches except for the qualification matches. Those 4 matches at the very end of the tournament are the only ones that are best of 5. Everything else best of 3. So looking at AOT versus Biddy B, I would say it's probably going to end up being, I'll give Biddy B a good solid puncher's chance in that one and say it'll be 2-1 to AOT. But honestly, that's a hard series to call because AOT doesn't practice that often, at least so far. And Biddy B has been cheesy crafting. So I would say this is probably going to be a 2-1 in favor of AOT just based on AOT's past experience. But it's hard for me to call that. I can't be super confident. Smarty Cakes versus Lundia, I'm going to guess 2-0 in favor of Smarty, but I think Lundia will show some very funny things. For Ava and Gerald, I'm going to say Gerald proceeds past this one 2-0, but I do think that there's that's just because Gerald's been grinding a lot and has practiced a lot of ZVZ as well. I played a ZVZ against him even, and I was kind of ahead. I was winning in terms of the map control and the expansion count and stuff, but he had the better immediate grasp on what units to make, and that was eventually something that overwhelmed me. So I feel like that's one of those things that Gerald is going to have in spades that Ava, who's a bit less active, and other Zergs in general are going to have a tough time. So I think I would favor Gerald in pretty much any ZVZ he might reach, especially if he hit him up later on and hit him up roll Z. I would actually say Gerald should probably take that game. That's how confident I am in Gerald's ZVZ knowledge. So just pointing that out there, he's a strong player. And obviously, it's very cool to see him showing up here as a tournament debutant. I did just get through talking about how I was, I seed all of the new players pretty lowly, but Jarl has been playing for months and months and months. He's just never actually played in a tournament. That's very different than some of the other homies who don't necessarily play too often or are brand new to the project. And Jarl is actually a ranked player, a class 2 player. And so that is like a very rare situation indeed. Moving on, we do have Hapsea, the man himself, playing against Cannoli. Again, I did say, Hapsea does sometimes struggle versus like the air switch. Cannoli's almost known to be the air switch man. He just like suddenly makes a bunch of Gorgs or Skiths. But I think Hapsea's mechanics should comfortably glide him over to a 2-0 over Cannoli. That being said, Cannoli has been grinding a lot himself, so there's a pretty solid chance he could at least take a match. I would say it would have to be one of those weird, drawn-out games where Cannoli can't be broken at his natural, and then switch switches into like a 2-base like mass Skith play, and then Pangea has flashbacks to Nam when Hamster did that to him or whatever, and just it crumbles in that moment, and then comes back afterwards. So at best it'll be 2-1 in favor of Pangea, but I'm pretty sure it'll be a 2-0, and Cannoli will drop to the lower bracket. There is a whole lower bracket down here, guys. Remember that. Looking ahead, we've got Balethal versus 3-Crow. Balethal just hasn't practiced that much, although when he did play a little bit recently, he was, he has a comfortable understanding of how to open it up with like early gateways. I'm not sure how well his multitasking fares later on in the game. I would speculate that it's not super good because it has been a while since he's actually played super actively. But I would say 3-Crow has to watch out for that like Balethal has this knack of just building like a lot of gateway units early on and then A-moving, and then like if that happens at the wrong time, you can absolutely get destroyed if you're trying something fancy, and 3-Crow does sometimes try something fancy. I'll say 3-Crow should 2-0 here, but Balethal has a chance to just sort of A-move into him, so there is that as well. Moving ahead, Dead Infested is going to close out this side of the bracket with the opening matches against Toyota Miguel. This matchup historically has gone Dead Infested's way, but Toyota has been grinding. They've done a lot of practice games, so it's very interesting to see that. I would say that Dead Infested has been playing a lot of PvT in general. He sees Toyota and then later on Mystery Meat seated ahead of him in the bracket. I'm going to look at that and say Dead Infested has a lot of his work cut out for him, but I think he should have a strong showing versus Toyota. I think they'll actually be longer games than you might expect, but Dead Infested should 2-0 this. That being said, Toyota might have something up his sleeve, so there's a puncher's chance for him to get at least one win. That being said, I think Dead Infested is by far and away the favorite. He's been grinding a lot, practicing a lot. I gotta tip my hat to him. He's been doing a lot of Cosmonarchy practice lately. He's serious about this. He's gonna go for it. All right, moving on to the other side of the bracket, we are going to see Dino Man's random against Jack Yelansky's Zerg. I have not seen, I can't believe Dino Man actually signed up as random, dude, but I have not seen Dino Man play that much lately as a result of him being random, which is high variance. Like if it was Dino Man's Zerg, I'd say, okay, well, maybe he can surprise Jack for a game. But if it's his random, there's so difficult to call that. I'm going to say Jack 2-0's Dino Man. And then, even if he doesn't, he has got to go up against Arbuz in the next set. That's not going to be looking too hot for him. I do think that Dino Man will be seeing an opening move where he's unfortunately going to be into the lower bracket. I think Jack is, even though he hasn't been able to play too much lately for a variety of other reasons to himself, Jack has been in a situation where he's just like, he's got a good understanding of things. He follows the project very religiously in that way. He's a man who I would say he's watched all the casts. He's definitely been up to his eyeballs in Cosmonarchy content and been playing a lot. So not necessarily playing a lot of PvP, but definitely playing a lot in general. So I do think that Jack is in a good spot to just take this one comfortably. I don't know how he's going to fare against Arbuz, but versus Dino Man, I give it to him 2-0. Then we've got the return of Ayud. Ayud64 has returned. Very exciting to get him back in. He opens up with a TVT against Lucifirius. This should theoretically be a comfortable match for him, but I played him in a TVT and I beat him. So, I'm just going to say if Ayud goes on to win this whole thing, just remember, I am still the one who beat Ayud. You know what I'm saying? But no, I do think Ayud is actually going to be comfortably in a macro-oriented position. He's been grinding. He's been playing a lot. Lucy is not going to be in as good of a situation as he had hoped, given his seeding and given the fact that Ayud is at this point. He's been. This reminds me of when Mystery Meat had a lower seed than Dead Infested in the tournament, the Tyrant's Tale qualifier, where Mystery Meat didn't actually he hadn't played in so long. And to Dead Infested's credit, Dead Infested did take the opening match of that series. He was up 1-0 at some point in that best of 3. That was kind of crazy. And then I think there was one close game after that, and then there was the reverse sweep was finished after. So that was one of those situations where it's like, God damn, Mystery Meat might have actually faltered there. But anyway, looking at the way that Ayud has been going, I would say he's probably going to be in a comfortable spot. That being said, I can't know that. I don't know how much he's going to grind. I don't know how much he's going to go for. I can't seed him based on what I think his true peak would be, because then he'd be top 2 or top 3 or something, you know what I mean? So that's one of those situations where it's you can't really pick that. You can't really just assume that that's going to work out that way. No. You gotta go with a decayed seed, and let him grind back up to it. Same way we did with Mystery Meat. So no harm, no foul there, I would say, but definitely interested in seeing where things go with Ayud. And it's also worth pointing out that, by the way, Ramen, so Hit 'em Up, Top Ramen, to a lesser extent Arbuz, and to a lesser extent Hapsea have all been grinding a lot, but Mystery Meat and Veek have not been playing at all lately. And Shopkeeper Dog has been grinding, and Gerald Storm has been grinding, and Smarty Cakes has been grinding. The Night Fox has been inactive. So like those top 10 seeds, just wanted to throw those out at you guys because I haven't really talked about them yet. I mean, I'm going to talk about Fox and Dog later on, but in this exact little area of the bracket. But yeah, just wanted to point that out because like there's been a lot of inactivity in that upper 10 seeds. And so like at the very least they played in a recent tournament, so I could look at that for their results and for their seed. But when it comes to Aoud, he's been on a break, and so it's expected that he would be vulnerable. I have faith Lucy will cheese him. I don't know if it'll work, but I have faith Lucy will cheese him. Moving ahead after Aoud, I'm going to say I'm going to say like a 2-0, but there's going to be a close game in there that Lucy might be able to take. After Aoud does that, we have Veek 7 against just Barisu. Barisu, again, a C-ranked Terran in StarCraft 1. I do think that he's grown a lot. He does like nukes. Maybe he'll enjoy Morning Stars even better. He did install the game just earlier today, finally, on Linux. So congrats. He's up and running. He'll be facing off against Veek, who's also now on Linux. It's a Linux matchup. I can't believe it. Lucy's also on Linux. So if Lucy beats Aoud, and then, he's going to be guaranteed a Linux rematch or a Linux matchup again in the round 2, that could be very epic. But anyway, you can install this on Linux, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I would say Veek should definitely comfortably beat Barisu because Barisu is new to the project, so there is that. The problem is I actually don't know what Barisu's level will be like and if he's going to grind. And again, Veek has not been playing a lot lately, so it's worth pointing that out as well. Then we move on to Shopkeeper Dog versus K-Dusk. I'm going to guess Veek 7-2-0 Barisu for the record, but I do think Barisu, I mean, he's just an unknown quantity, so it's really hard to prepare for that. Dog versus K-Dusk, TVT. I don't know if TVT is Dog's best matchup. I know he's been playing a lot of that versus Ramen. I have to give him this 2-0 on paper because I haven't seen K-Dusk play a lot lately, but at least it should be a comfortable matchup for the man, considering he's mostly struggled versus Protoss, fighting Neblime and Arbuz, and then I think he might have fought a little bit against Hit 'em Up maybe once. I'm not really sure. I do wish that Zopes was in here because I feel like he would be a solid contender. He's a bio man, a man after my own heart. I love bio in Terran, and he's been gaming, dude. He was so enjoying Cosmonarchy going bio that for a while he decided to play bio only in StarCraft 1 when there was low activity in the server, he couldn't find a game or whatever, or he just was playing StarCraft 1 instead of Cosmonarchy for whatever reason. I don't know why anybody would do that. He was playing bio and he was like, yeah, I'm gonna play it against Protoss. I'm gonna play it against Terran. And so he's a homie. But anyway, K-Dusk is, I would say, a similarly skilled player from what I've been told. Zopes was a solid player who might have been able to contend for like maybe the lower bracket spots in this gauntlet or something like that. So we'll see if K-Dusk can activate that way. I just haven't seen any of his games recently because he hasn't played recently. So hard for me to know. Another unknown quantity, but another Terran nonetheless. We'll see if Dog can make it over comfortably 2-0 like I am currently predicting. Then we go to Enozlliks' Zerg versus the Night Fox, who might be Terran, might be Zerg. Obviously, if Fox switches to Zerg, he should comfortably dismiss Enozlliks into the lower bracket. I would say 2-0. As Terran, I'm not sure. I haven't seen his Terran too much, so we'll just have to wait and see about that one. I think Enozlliks will probably prepare some cheesy play and maybe do a little bit of practicing in general. I would love to see him succeed because he is, of course, one of the homies who donates on Coffee, and obviously a homie who has donated his time and effort making music for the project, so I appreciate that as well. Meanwhile, we've got Fox over here who has been AFK for a little bit when it comes to that. He still contributes to the project by talking about it, talking balance, talking ideas. He's been working on a campaign apparently, which is very cool. He's done some of his own mapping as well, experimented with certain melee stuff or whatever, different concepts for advanced workers. He's a homie. And so I would love to see both of these players succeed. I think Fox will be the one to do it. I will say if Fox is Terran, I think Enozlliks successfully cheeses him, and it's 2-1. So Fox will be 2-1 if he's Terran. I think at 2-0 if he's Zerg. He's just too resilient in the mirror matchup. He's been grinding it a lot versus players who've been playing a lot more and probably just frankly are at a higher level of mechanical skill than Enozlliks is at. So I think the strategic familiarity and the mechanical skill are both on Fox's side. I just think that Enozlliks will find some cheese in the ZVT matchup that will maybe find purchase versus him. So there you go. That's my prediction. Then we've got Jujik's Protoss versus Benno's Terran. And Benno has not actually practiced too much as Terran, it feels like. I know that he's a man who previously was Protoss, and then previously, before he was Protoss, he was Terran. So he's gone back to the well and gone back to Terran, to his roots. Love to see that. However, Jujik has some idea of navigating the matchup. I think he's going to be just fine in this situation, and we're going to be seeing Benno be slapped around by Jujik. I'm going to say 2-0, although Benno could take a game. Like, I just haven't seen his Terran. I have no idea what his Terran is like. So I'm going to say Jujik makes it past and starts to face Top Ramen afterwards. That'll be a 2-0 in favor of Jujik. And that will take us to the lower bracket, which we don't have a fill out for. I'm not going to bother like fake filling out the bracket or whatever just yet. So all of that to be said, it's an exciting time to be a Cosmonarch. I hope you guys are looking forward to this particular tournament. And you know what? We might get Green Eggs to sign up, which is another Terran. We might get many other people to just sign up at the last minute. So all of these matchups may be completely invalidated, but I hope you enjoyed me talking about them anyway. All right, homies, let's talk balance. So obviously something that has been happening a lot lately is Protoss have been winning everything. Nerf toss is real? Well, I have decided on a course of action to adjust Protoss a bit and rein them in ever so slightly. I know our Protoss players, 3Crow, sometimes Biddy B, sometimes Hit 'em Up, etc., will all be listening with bated breath. Smarty Cakes and Arbuz, who I don't think listens to these, and who else? Jujik, obviously, and then there's Dead Infested. Yeah, all you guys, all you Protosses, you listen up now. I've got words for you, okay? So one of the things that I've been going back and forth on when it comes to some of the changes that have been made lately is I've been trying to make it so that Protoss feel like they have good power. And obviously we've done the tech gating and we've done all of this other stuff and changed up a bunch of how they work. And I think a lot of those changes have been for the better. Having a little bit of guidelines for which units and structures you can make in the early game seems to have gone a long way to making the race feel better in that respect. I know, so there's some people who aren't as much of a fan. I think Shambler has voiced his opposition to that. But overall, I feel like it's been pretty good as far as like setting it down some guidelines and some guardrails for the early game. It's good for Protoss as well, because then they might not be tempted to build a tier 2 or tier 3 structure as their first production structure and then get owned in the early game as a result. So I think that also helps. We might even go ahead and make that a little bit more significant by making it so that, for example, you unlock the Crucible, Aquifer, and Matrix with any tier 1 acquisition or something like that. Maybe the Matrix would stay. Maybe even the Crucible would stay. I'm not sure. But basically making it so that, like, theoretically you could go, you have your Nexus, right? Then you could go Embassy, and then Embassy unlocks tier 2. It does do that. So you could go Embassy into something else, but you could theoretically even go Embassy into Crucible, and then the Crucible could unlock tier 3, and then you'd have access to the Prostration Stage or Argosy as your first structure. That could theoretically be something we do later. That would probably only happen in team games, FFAs, whatever. I don't think you'd ever see a 1v1 build that would work with that. But you know what? I have been wrong before. Anyway, there might be some more adjustments that we make to make that more uniform across all of the tech tree for the Protoss. But overall, there's been changes like that. There's been obviously the Psionic Storm revision to make it more interactive and interesting from our perspectives as developers, and hopefully for players as well. I know there's been some trauma because Veek didn't filter out the structure aspect of it, and then it was like sieging circuits and stuff, and Zerg players were just absolutely destroyed by that. It's a bit better now. I think it's been adjusted quite heavily, and we'll see about ways to make it additionally interesting and powerful and whatever. Make it so that it's not too powerful and also not too weak and annoying and clunky to use. I feel like the current setup for Storm is pretty cool. We just need to make sure that it's actually working all the time. I think Smarty reported some issues where sometimes it wasn't casting and stuff. So gotta try to track that down and investigate it, see if we can reproduce that. Anyway, that all being said, we are here to discuss what's happening now as I speak. So I have just sat down some changes to the Protoss tech tree, not to the tech tree, but to the units themselves. I have gone through and increased the time cost of the following units: Zealot, Dracodon, Hierophant, Golem, Idol, Amaranth, Herald, Atreus, Cantavis, a Cantor, and Architect. I have not adjusted anything from Tier 3 Beyond, and I have not adjusted anything from the Stargate, and I haven't adjusted anything from the Embassy. We'll see if any of those do need to be touched up later on. But the reason why I decided to increase the time cost was I was discussing this with Veek7 in the Discord server, which you can join in the link below if you're not already there. One of the things that we went back and forth on is, like, I was thinking, well, the Draconin is a really powerful unit now that it has that extra durability, so it should probably cost 150 minerals instead of 125. And Veek7 grossly overreacted and said the Draconin is dead now. Meanwhile, Protoss players still A-moving Terrans with the Draconin. So actually, as much as he's, I would say overreacting to the change, I will say that the change did not seem to have any significant effects on the openers, but he did point out that he would prefer to see units increase in time cost to make it so that, if you want to get the same level of strength for your army, you have to spend more money on production facilities. This is me reading into what he was saying. He didn't elaborate too much on that, but he was saying that, like, it doesn't, it restricts the player's choices more heavily if you reduce their, if you increase their resource costs for units versus increasing their time costs. And I'm not 100% sure I agree with that in all cases, because I actually think what you might end up seeing out of this change is, for example, a lot of gateways being made, extra gateways being made by Protoss. Then they have a bigger army than before. Obviously, the trade-off being that presumably they'd be spending more resources on their army, and so they would be less powerful when it comes to tech and other such things. I personally think that some units will probably still need resource cost adjustments, because otherwise you might be in a situation where you can pretty comfortably spam out a military, get a contain going on, and then not really be slowed down in your tech or in your expansion. I am hoping that perhaps with the Crucible, which obviously would counteract a lot of the time costs, all of the time costs really, and more, and then some, when it comes to the Protoss overall. I'm hoping that maybe people going for Crucibles to make it so that they can unshackle their early game units would be another way to invest in your, initial production that would basically be doubling down on what you already have. And that would conflict with being able to tech up, because the Crucible costs 300 Vespene. It was 350, but in the same adjustment that I just made to all of the time costs of the units, I also reduced the gas cost of it and increased the mineral cost of it slightly. So it's 250 minerals, 300 gas. It was 200 minerals, 350 gas. So you're a little bit more able to fit that into your build order to counteract this set of nerfs, but also to supercharge your production in general. This goes beyond reducing it by just the amount that they've been increased, right? Like, most units did not get an increase beyond in excess of 25%. I don't think maybe any unit got that, because, like, the Architect went from 45 to 50, the Draconin went from 28 to 32, the Zealot went from 22 to 25. Yeah, so all of those percentage-wise, your Crucible will more than negate that. So, plus there's a bunch of units that didn't get adjusted that are just going to be buffed by the Crucible. And so, if Crucibles become more common as a result of this change, then I think that will have been something that gates and eats into the tech power of the Protoss, their ability to build additional tech. It also should increase their reliance on their existing bases. And generally speaking, high-level Protosses versus high-level Terrans and Zerg were effectively able to establish a contain, but not be slowed down in having a very powerful army that could threaten to end the game, while also being able to expand and tech. Like, they were doing everything at once. And so I think that is probably the main thing. I don't think it was a skill diff when it comes to the players who were playing as Protoss, because the same thing was happening when, say, Ramen played against Hit 'em Up, and Hit 'em Up was the Protoss, that was happening. And then when Hit 'em Up played Terran and Ramen played Protoss, the same thing was happening where the Protoss was winning with the same kind of tools. Now, I do think that a large portion of that, apparently, according to Hit 'em Up's testimony, and I didn't see any of these games, so I can't comment on it, was down to the Architect being able to get a lot of free pot shots, and the fact that it would pretty much have guaranteed splits if it's engaging at maximum range. So I have gone in and made a change that Veek7 originally pitched some time ago, where now the Architect will split one missile for every 4 range traveled. My current implementation needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but broadly speaking, when it comes to the actual end result, this means if you engage within Architects in the mid-range, within 4 range of the target, then at that situation, your Architects will be splitting only 1 missile. So they'll only be doubling their damage as opposed to tripling it. But if they are attacking at near their maximum range, which has been reduced from 10 to 9, that you will end up seeing the Architect have both of its splits still intact. And so that is to give them some more conditional utility when being charged down, in exchange for the fact that their weapon range was reduced by 1, their sight range was reduced by 3 because they had a ridiculous sight range for some reason. Their time cost was increased by 5 seconds. Those were the nerfs that hit them. So giving them a little bit more usability in those mid-range fights so that they're not complete sitting ducks, so a little bit less binary, I think is good. It also theoretically unlocks even more power for them, where they can get a third split missile for a total of 4x the damage if they are engaging with cliff advantage or with the assistance of magisters, or they're attacking a unit that is running away very far and still have vision on the other targets near it due to a witness or something like that. These are all cases where you might end up seeing the architects dealing even more damage than they were previously. But those are much more conditional cases that require setup from the Protoss player or mistakes from the Terran player or whoever they're facing or whatever. I'm thinking like vultures running away and stuff for that last such example. And I think that's probably fine. The fact that the architect has one less attack range, I think will make it a little bit more conditional as to when you can use the architects versus a phalanx stack from Terran. It also, I think overall the architect will still be useful. It might be more useful versus Zerg now, but, we'll have to wait and see. The projectile speed of the architect's missile did also get reduced by 25%. It still moves pretty fast, don't let it kid you, but it's still it makes it a little bit more easy to see and perhaps react preemptively. Like if you start to split your forces further away from each other when the architect missile or the architect charge up sequence is happening, you might actually get that off. You might also be able to evade, move some of your units out of the Protoss's vision range before the missile gets to split range, and then at that point you might end up being a little bit more insulated from the damage. That's another thing that I was talking with Hit 'em Up about, actually, is that one of the things that should be known is that you want to patrol the area looking for witnesses, because spotting for your architects does allow you to hit more units. You won't split to targets you can't see, basically. Whereas actually that's not the case for bounce attacks, which I think is kind of interesting, because the Protoss targeting is supposed to be like a smart reactive targeting for the architect, whereas bounce attacks are just like, they bounce, right? So I actually like that the Zerg bounces regardless. I feel like that's more thematic for them anyway, but you actually need vision for the Protoss hit, right? Similar to you need vision for phalanxes, because phalanxes can shoot farther than they can see, right? That's an evergreen aspect of their design. So I think a lot of that is going to be, a lot of these changes are going to leave the matchup in an interesting state where people are going to need to practice up a little bit. I do think that, this kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that Zerg had the larva time cost increase from 12 seconds per larva to 14, and Terran had the fulcrum changes where now the first fulcrum does come online a little bit slower, but the units are coming out of it a little bit stronger. I feel like that ends up being pretty interesting overall, and having this change, I know it's going to hit Protosses like, what the fuck, why are you doing that, Pronogo? And I understand that some Protosses are going to feel aggrieved by that, but I think it's worth basically leveling everybody out now and realizing and acknowledging that, like, hey, Zerger's still trying to deal with the 12 second to 14 second change, and the fact that the new eco maybe hit them hardest when it comes to transitioning in from the early game to the mid game, and then you've got the Terrans who are still trying to make pure Fulcrum work. I personally think it's a bad idea to go pure Fulcrum, but everybody's trying to make pure Fulcrum work, and so I think maybe they're debuffing themselves a little bit, nerfing themselves a little bit with those openers. But despite that fact, it does mean that their first military unit is going to be slower. I don't think this opens up Protoss to too much early game shenanigans. I do think you might want to open Legionnaire as your first unit as a Protoss player, assuming you're going a gateway opener. Obviously, Lattice is mostly unaffected by this because you would go like Sim or Vassal as your first unit, and those units did not receive any time cost adjustments. So based on that, I would say if you're going gateway opener, you might want to open Legionnaire. One of my favorite pet builds lately as Protoss is I go Pylon. I do the pylon at like 8, which is pretty late for most people, and then I scout with that, and then my next worker makes the gateway, and then 2 or 3 workers later, I make a Nexus without making a military unit, and I go for a Warden after the Nexus, and then I make a Legionnaire. I know that sounds really late and really scary, but in practice on most maps, you get your Legionnaire out as like, the first Vulture from the Terran player is coming across your bridge on Demoloon or something like that, right? So these are just like little things that I've noticed from seeing that, where I'm doing it and the enemy scouts me doing it with their Mason, and then I still am just able to laugh in their face because they can't attack past the Warden, and I build up my Dracodon count from there. I add a second gate in my main or whatever, and it does play out similarly to some of the like almost like some PvZ builds that I've seen where you go like Pylon Forge Cannon Nexus or something like that, or Pylon Forge Nexus Cannon, something like that, right? And so these are little things that you can do as a Protoss player if you want, that are completely unperturbed by this change, because I didn't adjust Legionnaire, I didn't adjust Ecclesiast, so those 2 units are safe to open with if you want to go for that without worrying about like your first unit timing being different. And yes, of course, your Dracon and your Hierophant are going to be different now, your Zealot's going to be different, but overall I feel like this is going to be a pretty positive change. Now we'll see if it's too much. we do need to get that testing done before the rest of the tournament goes, before the tournament actually kicks off. So I welcome all testing and feedback. Of course, if you hate this change, do let me know. If you think this change is potentially fair and balanced, let me know. I'm sure that our Terran players and perhaps even our Zerg players are going to feel pretty good about this. For a long time, people have said that Protoss is kind of out of whack. Obviously, some of the more mid-table Protosses, like I would say 3-Crow Jujic, to a lesser extent Dedifested and Smarty, might have been less inclined to feel that way. I don't want to feel like I'm popping their bubble right before the tournament. I just wanted to make sure that everybody else was feeling like the game was in a reasonable state. And you know what? Again, if this is too far, we'll figure it out. So I have faith in us. I have faith in the No Frauds Club, the Yes Faith Club, the No Frauds Club. That's how we're going to be rocking this one. And so, yeah, just wanted to point that out and tell you guys about that. There will be a couple of other changes coming. I want to see if maybe adjusting the Enozlliks further isn't worth doing. There are some tier 3 Zerg options that I think will need to be taken a look at. I think the Acropolis, for example, will probably just focus on the Omnispores part and remove the other Tendrils attack. And I'll probably be looking through some of the other tier 3 Zerg options to adjust them for the purpose of just making them a little bit more, either more or less powerful, depending on what the unit is, right? I think the Acropolis really stands out to me as like a super powerful unit. The Cascathalor might also be like that, but we're going to have to find out. That might be one of those things where the speed of the projectile might be adjusted for the Cascathalor, stuff like that. Not sure about the Enozlliks. It's kind of just, it doesn't have like a stat associated with it that's super cool. It does get plus armor pen based on the projectile range traveled, which I think is really neat for the Enozlliks. But it also has native, it doesn't have any native armor pen, so it can get up to 6 armor pen based on the fact that it has 6 weapon range. I think that's actually kind of neat, but it's a self-sufficient unit, right? It's not something that you're really going to benefit from because Zerg has no way to increase armor or range rather for your unit, right? It's not like there's anything that can increase the weapon range of a unit the way that like the Magister does for Protoss. So there might need to be something like that. You can't garrison the Enozlliks and something like Terrans can to increase their weapon range. So maybe Zerg needs something like that. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe that's a buff to Carapace Swarm, is that you get +1 weapon range or +2 weapon range shooting from Carapace Swarm to units not in Carapace Swarm. Imagine that. It turns into like pseudo high ground. That could be kind of funny. Anyway, there's a bunch of things that we might end up adjusting for tier 3 stuff related to Zerg, although that would any Carapace Swarm changes would also impact the Vilgoricor, right? You remember that. The Vilgoricor did get buffed to give a 200 HP Carapace Swarm instead of 100 HP, so the durability of its temporary swarm did double. I think probably the biggest issue with the Vilgoricor is that it can be focused down before the Carapace Swarm hits, so that timing might need to be shortened or something. But anyway, that's, I think, kind of an interesting thing. And, it's a little bit thematic that maybe small arms fire works less effectively versus the Vilgoricor because it allows it to proc versus like a focused fire to break down the beast before it can spray the Carapace Swarm everywhere. I think that's pretty cool. So there is that as well. But yeah, the only earlier tier unit for the Zerg that I might be thinking about adjusting at this point is probably the Vigorlisk. There might be some changes to the Sikralisk, the Amaxilisk, but I think for the most part, those units have their niches. The Mutalisk did get buffed fairly recently, so I don't think we need to change anything about that. And so, yeah, for Protoss, I already talked about the changes that I have made to them. I will say that there's going to be some talk of the Mind Tyrant later on because it's a coffee question for 3-Crow. So I will be answering stuff about that. I'll save that for then. For Terran, I do want to make the change that I've talked about for the Cataphract. I do have a lead on how exactly to implement that from a technical perspective, but basically firing a salvo of all 4 of its lasers with a line pattern that is very straightforward, where it's like firing all 4 of them in a cone almost. Not really a cone exactly, but like that's the closest thing that I can pull off. Sort of like the Valkyrie pattern, but like all at once, right? And so it wouldn't be staggered. And I feel like stuff like that is pretty cool. I remember back in the day, I thought about the Goliath, which has turned into this Gatling unit now. I was thinking about how the Dreadnought in Warhammer 40k, Dawn of War 2 in particular, comes to mind for this, which isn't an RTS, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. It is technically an RTS. It's just such a boring one. But the Dreadnought has this sweeping attack where it just blasts the area in like a sweeping cone motion. You can actually see this at work in the Dawn of War 1 cutscene where like the Dreadnought is gatling all the time. I was almost thinking of making something like that happen, not for the Cataphract or the Goliath, but just in general. I remember imagining that. So this is not quite that epic and cool, but there's a kernel of that idea there, right? With all that said, there's not really anything else for Terran that needs a huge adjustment, I feel like. There's probably going to be a pass on resource costs for Tier 3 stuff. Not the Tier 3 tech structure itself, but like the Iron Foundry, the Nanite Assembly, to a lesser extent the Apothecary might get looked at. The units within these structures are probably fine when it comes to their stats. Maybe there's an exception to be made for the Pazuzu, I don't know. People have been telling me that it's really good, but nobody sends replays of it, and nobody really describes the interactions very deeply. Anyway, people discuss the Pazuzu, but nobody asks how is the Pazuzu. No, I'm just kidding. All that being said, I do think that overall it's going to be an interesting time where if we do get to Tier 3, it's going to be a great time to see all this stuff in action. So I will be adjusting some of the costs there, but the big ticket items are definitely Cataphract, to a lesser extent a Vigorlisk, to a greater extent a Criminalisk, and otherwise just going through the Tier 3 for Zerg and for Zerg and Terran, and adjusting their costs mostly to bring things in line with what, now that we're getting there a little bit more frequently, bring those in line with the purpose of smooching them, of getting them up to speed and up to snuff. And again, we'll talk about the Mind Tyrant later on in this episode. So that is the balancing section. Let's talk about that lovely community that we've got over on the Discord server, which you can join for free. It's not even something we charge for. I imagine charging for Discord, LOL, could be us in the future, but probably not. Wink. So, as is customary, as we enter into the community roundup, we are going to open things up by talking about some of the players, some of the gamers, some of the new users that have joined us. And boy, howdy, do we have a couple of those homies. As in the previous time spent talking about, in last week's community roundup, we obviously had a whole influx, a smorgasbord, a gigunda number of new homies. And now we indeed have more new homies. So starting from the past 7 days or 8 days or so, we had AG Tangra, who has been a loyal, but recent but loyal follower of the channel, who's been watching all the videos. Shout out to him. Pretty cool guy. We also had somebody with 3 hyphens as their name, who seems to be interested in playing the game and talked about gaming and talked about some other stuff. So that's pretty cool. We had a man named Gay Fesh, who is actually Gemini, who joined because he saw me playing the his campaign, Life of a Marine, from way back. So that's pretty funny. Then we had Scorp. I don't know if he's actually started playing yet, but he did end up setting the game up. So classic man. We had Grime Boss, who's apparently a StarCraft 1 high MMR Terran player who has a bit of a sordid history, apparently. Welcome to him. He might end up joining. Same is true for Kame Zerg, who has joined a Swedish Zerg player, like 2300 MMR or something like that. That's what a hit him up told me. So a shout out to him. Welcome, homies. We've got YT Scene. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be YouTube Scene or he just likes the letters YT, but either way, YT Scene is indeed in the server. He's been gaming. He's been playing. He's been trying to game and play and all that cool stuff. We had a couple of people with very strange usernames. Substrate Eye of Darkness, who's like African Scam Ro Kawe. I have no idea. And then some other dude who's Wasser Melone Fue or XXX. They have joined and they have decided to play the game, so that's cool. I don't know if they're going to be PvP players or what, or if they're actually just scam artists. Who knows? I got a guy named Stand, SSS Stand. I don't know. Whatever. He's got Stand, but he's like a snake, so he says Stand. And he's actually got the character from Braid, the man, the myth, the legend, as his avatar there. So that's pretty interesting. Obviously, big fans of Jonathan Blow around here. And then just moments ago, as I was actually paused to go get some water before recording this section of the podcast, we had Yuang 28. Classic move there. And so shout out to him. And shout out to all of the homies who have joined. We welcome you with open arms and open dads. One of my favorite emojis. Moving on then, it's time to talk about the map pool, or the maps in general that have been added to the pool. This is Demaloon. I mentioned it earlier. I showed it to you guys earlier. This is a port of Overwatch. This is actually technically an older screenshot of the map, funnily enough, because this is before I added the town center markers everywhere, and I think I may have changed a couple of doodadery pieces here and there, but mostly I think it was just the visual update to give it a more obvious placements for your town centers, since I do prefer when it's obvious like that. Then we have, since I've already gone over this is in the map pool for Acropolis number 2. Take a good look, study it, learn it. You will be playing on it if you're in the tournament, and you'll probably be playing on it even if you're not in the tournament, because people like to play on those kinds of maps. We will move on to another map by the Shambler. This one's called Origin X, and it is indeed an interesting layout. I feel like the choke point is way too far. It might have also been updated since I took the screenshot, or since the screenshot was supplied. I'm not sure. I think this is the most up-to-date version, though. And anyway, it's worth pointing this out. It's worth showing this because obviously he has been working on this map. I think he was working on another space platform map that was XY symmetry, like top left, bottom right spawns or something. I saw some screenshots of that, but he didn't post it, and he didn't post an image of it. So he'll have to wait until next week to get his map looked at. But overall, I'd say that besides the really far away choke, which is very bad for Zerg players, I do think that the map is got an interesting layout. I think there was some talk between Shopkeeper Dog and Shambler about like the layout of the map, and I know Hamster had some ideas as well because there's a lot of games played on it. I do like the little X marks the spot in the middle. I do like the little organ sneak peek flesh tile set stuff going on there for platforms. It's pretty neat. It's pretty easy to see how this layout could be tweaked and adjusted. I'm not really sure how well it flows into itself. There's a pretty big gap between this third base, which I assume is going to be your third base, and this base down here. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it might be something that gets considered later on as like, there's already been cover added to it so that you can maybe fight around this little platform. I would almost encourage there to be like the use of this doodad here over there instead, because then it doesn't block vision, and that might be really useful for the defender to basically swap this out for something that still is able to do things without obviously being heavily hectored by the fact that the platform there, the little piece there that sticks out, does indeed block vision. But otherwise, it's certainly a map where you can get off to some really powerful battles, get up to some really great shenanigans early on. So I'm appreciative of the scale that is afforded by a map with this many open entrances and stuff. I would just worry that the rush distance is kind of low, mixed with the choke that's very difficult to defend if you're Zerg, and probably difficult to defend in general, that I feel like when I've seen this map, I've seen a lot of games on this map where it's been like, basically you're pushing into your opponent's natural really easily, to the point where like if you go for an early expo, you're very vulnerable. And we've kind of moved away from that in the map design overall. We've made it so that it's a little bit easier to defend the choke and contest the choke into your natural without having to go all the way back to your ramp in the main. That's more evocative of like really old style gameplay. Like you think about actually Titan Forge, a map by Shambler back in Acropolis number 1, there was a lot of pushing into the natural area before you got your area set up. There's a lot of that stuff back in like Otherworld and other like really old maps that I'm pulling out for those who have been around here for a while. This is something that it does feel like a very retro style in that respect comparing it to the maps of yore as opposed to the more modern ones. I think some slight improvements in that regard, or changes in that regard, that push it more into the more modern direction would actually be of help in this situation. And yeah, that's right, Shambler. I just told you to embrace modernity. We've got Serenity as our final map to take a look at here. This is a map by Biddy B, prettied up by Jujic. We've got, this was a contender for something that might be added in to Acropolis number 2, but at the end of the day, I decided it had just been released. It hadn't really been tested. It was made with the idea of testing up the different mineral amounts. So it has 9 minerals in the main and natural. I decided to change this into... I don't actually know if I pushed the latest updates to this map, actually, because I did tweak it a little bit. But I decided to change it into a 7 mineral in the main and nat, and then keep the 9 minerals in the third, so that it's and the other base as well. I believe this is, let's see, yeah, this is 9 minerals over here. These little high ground bases. So yeah, I tried to make it a little bit more. Just to allow there to be more resources on the map, but not in the mains and the naturals, so that you still had a little bit of more familiar gameplay and pacing to those opening 2 bases. I do like some interesting aspects of the construction of the map. Apparently it was inspired by Omnivore, which is a wacky map that Mystery Meat actually commissioned way back in the day. Last year, I believe, is when I made that. Or maybe it was really early on in this year. It might have been, I know it was played at one point in like an underclass invitational. It was used that as the excuse to kind of practice a bunch of wacky maps, but I think I may have made it in the waning days of 2023, or maybe just super early on in 2024. Either way, it was an interesting map, but one that it had like a neutral atlas that was on fire that would burn down around like the 3-minute mark, I think, that blocked a back path that was otherwise constrained by mineral fields, which you could mine out to be depleted. So you could move through it as soon as the Atlas was burned down or destroyed, but otherwise you could mine it out to open it up even further. So it was a really easy wall if you wanted to keep those mineral fields there once the Atlas was destroyed, and it was really easy to open up in the late game and stuff. So that was the plan of it. Of course, Brood War Pathing kind of foils all plans in that respect, and I didn't really like how the map layout actually worked out for scaling up your production, but it was interesting. There was some cool games played on it despite that, and so anyway, it's cool to see this kind of that kind of map be like rotated almost is sort of how BDB seems to have taken the inspiration. And it's cool to see more BDB maps in general. It's been a while since he's put stuff together, but he recently made Pr0totype, which we looked at in the previous Pr0totype, and so it's cool to see him back in action. It's also really cool, in my opinion, that he and Jujic are working together. There was some talk semi-recently of like BDB and Jujic working together on the maps and Alexander working on like the story part or whatever of a campaign. I thought that would be really funny to have like, you know, collaborations and teams being put together to make custom content. But it's already really cool to see the two of them working together on Melee maps in the first place. So anyway, that's really neat. Maybe one of the things I'll end up doing is handing Jujic some of like maybe I'll hand him Oil Australia and tell him to go nuts with the decor on that, because it's going to be a while before I can do any decor myself. I don't know. There might be cool stuff like that you know, maybe you could just send all your maps to Jujic and he'll make them prettier. I don't know. That seems to be his resident job and duty in this moment. So that is going to do it for our community roundup. So it's time to muscle on over to the coffee questions and see if we can't provide some coffee answers. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, time to answer those coffee questions. Like I mentioned before, we do this as a monthly perk, or a weekly perk, I guess, but if you donate monthly, you get this weekly perk. I think that makes some kind of sense temporally or otherwise. You can go to the coffee link that is on the screen in the bottom left, or in the description, of course. If you want to just click that link instead of having to type it into your browser, you can indeed enjoy some great benefits for subscribing monthly, and we enjoy the benefits of being able to work on the project a little bit more liberally. And if you, of course, you want something specific, you can always bounty things, but that's a little bit more separate and more ad hoc. Suffice it to say, there's a bunch of monthly perks. You can check our tiers, and there's some really cool options there. So nice, just like the episode title. We're going to be kicking things off with a question from Myrian. He actually was asking a little bit about the way that we were talking about porting Cosmonarchy into Antikythera. So he asks, in a previous Pr0totype, you mentioned using the Reatons in place of the Terrans in a hypothetical Cosmonarchy remake. What form would such a military take, and how would it differ from the Terrans? So, the Reatons are part of the Embra Seat member nations, Embra Seat being a race, or a regency as we call it, in Xibalba. And the Askosi actually come from the Embra Seat as well. So it's kind of telling that we would have two eventual member nations of the Embra Seat as distinct factions within a Cosmonarchy remake, where the Reatons replace Terrans and the Askosi exist as their own thing. I think it's pretty interesting to see that, because we're basically mentioning, or implying by doing that the member nations of the Embra Seat were at one point about approximately as powerful as the factions within Cosmonarchy or StarCraft 1 or whatever. You know, the factions in Cosmonarchy have more power than StarCraft 1, but it's removed from the original timeline and stuff, so it's pretty different. And anyway, I think it's kind of just an interesting little point to mention that, you know, these races, the Askosi and the Reatons and many others, have to actually band together just to stand the test of time to, stand up to the strengths of the other regencies in Xibalba. And yet we're talking about a situation where you go into, a setting like the Chrysilian sector, Cosmonarchy, the one that's made right now within StarCraft 1, and you're like, you could maybe take a less advanced, more primitive version of one member nation of the Embra Seat, and they can be competitive with, the Cosmonarchy StarCraft races. So I think that's kind of interesting, and maybe a little bit self-aggrandizing, because I do love my scale. And so if you have something that's way higher scale, higher power, later on to look forward to, it's kind of underlines how impactful and important the things that we're talking about actually are. So, the Reatons would replace the Terrans in a hypothetical remake of Cosmonarchy, which might not be hypothetical once, 2025 starts to really dawn upon us. But of course, we'll keep you guys posted on that. And one of the major aspects of this design for the Reatons would be in the way that it would differ from the Cosmonarchy Terrans is I think it would actually be a little bit more biocentric. I think mech would be a little bit more of a supportive element as opposed to a whole tertiary sort of or like alternative branch, which currently is kind of the composition of the Terrans. I actually feel like maybe this is just how I've evolved, generally speaking, as an RTS tech tree designer, which is like a hyper-specific aspect of game design. But I actually feel like it would probably be more interesting if you had a branch of, say, like you have this 3-branch structure that many of these RTS tech trees have for StarCraft 1, for Cosmonarchy, for, I would say, like, a lot of the work that I've been doing has been centered around the idea of having 3 or 4 military branches, right? I think, generally speaking, it's probably superior to have a primary branch, a secondary branch, and a tertiary branch, where you would very seldom see a composition made entirely of the secondary branch, though it would still be possible under niche circumstances, and you would never really be able to get away with the tertiary branch being the predominant one because it's just, they're too few and far in between as far as aspects go. So the way that you would imagine this would apply for the Reatons would be if their bio was the primary branch for them, and that would be a way to leverage their prolific nature, where the fact that they're a very prolific people. They're basically they reproduce very easily, reproduce very fast, and it doesn't take too long for them to grow into a reasonable aspect. Like they can account for their army sizes without the need of cloning, which would actually be an interesting aspect to Reaton society, where maybe it feels a lot more like... I actually don't know if cloning is used. I assume cloning is used in Warhammer 40k. I admit I do not know. I'm a bit ignorant of that. But I would imagine that the guardsmen... well, even if they are cloned, imagine if they weren't, and each one of the guardsmen that was sacrificed, because there's like millions and billions and trillions of guardsmen sacrificed every cycle or whatever, every solar, Earth year. And it's like, dude... having all of those be individual humans with souls and all this other stuff is like, I mean, maybe clones also have souls, but, having them have had to grow up kind of indicates the scale of the composition, instead of it just being something kind of like using technological magic to fabricate more people. In the same way that if it was all robots, that would be less significant and visceral than if it was all humans. In fact, even if they were clones of humans feels more visceral than robots. But I would say humans that were not cloned is even more visceral than human clones, right? So you can kind of think about that for the Reatons. If Reaton society and Reaton military did not use cloning whatsoever for whatever reason, and I'm not exactly sure why they would not use that. I have to think about that, but I think it would be a worthy goal to explain why, and it wouldn't just be some kind of... I don't think it's necessarily a cop-out to say that maybe their society is against the use of cloning, but it would probably make more sense, especially with the Reatons, which are pretty practical as far as people go. Maybe cloning just didn't work for them. Maybe they did not have the technology to do so, and maybe another race that doesn't have the compunctions against cloning and was interested in trying to clone the Reatons might be able to do so, and that could open up interesting storytelling developments later on. That being said, I would say that the Reatons would not use cloning from their lore standpoint, which means that every single member of their military would actually be a bona fide human, not human because they're not Terrans, but, Reaton, the bona fide organic, creature with a soul or whatever, made from the... made from the same biological processes that, we would make humans, right? Because the Reatons are humanoid. So, yeah, going into that kind of style, they would definitely differ from Terrans in that they would be more biocentric. Their mech units would definitely be more supportive in Tier 1, and then as you get scale up the tech tree, that you'd be looking at a situation where jumping up in the power, the mech units would probably be pivotal, like giant tanks or something like that, or giant walkers or whatever, but they would still be they would generally be... powerful individual units that you would deploy with a bunch of chaff around them, and that chaff would be the bio. So you could kind of think about that like in small scale skirmishes with Protoss when they just start transferring into adding architects to their army in the current meta. As far as I can tell, what ends up happening a lot of the time is you've got all of the zealots and maybe a lot of the Dracodons, and then you've also got your architects. And your architects are like 2 or 3 of them, and you can try to take these early engagements with the zealots being the sacrificial options, right? And that's very thematic, and that's very cool. You could imagine something kind of similar to that for the Reatons. Obviously, it would play out very differently because you'd have more units than a Protoss equivalent would have, and the powerful units might also be more numerous as a result. But I just think of that kind of style. So they would definitely play towards the idea of maximal usage of bio as their primary branch. I find that to be more interesting. I guess I'll elaborate on that point a little bit more. I feel like Protoss are already in that tier or in that category where they have their primary branch is clearly the Disciple branch, right? Formerly the Templar branch. The idea that you go Gateway and Grand Library and Prostration Stage and eventually Ancestral Archives. Like, this happens as long as the game goes long enough. Yes, they do eventually pivot around things like Arden Authority, but even that is more supplementary. You can't just have Architects. Now, maybe there's some dispute of that very recently, but I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be able to A-move with pure Architect. You need the chaff to provide vision, spotting, also to distract the military, to prevent engaging upon the Architects, right? That kind of thing. So going into that style, that's exactly what the sort of idea that I would have, in fact, for the Reatons. Of course, again, it would play out very differently than the Protoss. I'm not saying that the Terran replacement would play like Protoss does now, but Reatons would definitely have that kind of dynamic going for them, where they do have that. And I feel like that's interesting with Protoss, where like the Stellar branch for them, their air branch, provides more isolated supportive units that they still want their chaff they still want their ground army, they still want their ground game to be intact and active. And if they don't have that, then the air units become a lot less deadly unless they're really heavily invested in. Now, I think in an ideal world, you would probably never have an air-only army that would be super good and super capable of destroying stuff. And by never, I mean in the context of a 1v1. You'd probably always want some reliance on ground units because ground units respect terrain. And air units are kind of existing outside of that paradigm. In fact, I think it's great to have air units. I think they open up really interesting options. I know Veek thinks that... well, I actually don't know what Veek thinks about that. I would assume that when he says, I hate air units, he means like in aggregate, he's not as much of a fan of them, but he probably would concede that they do offer very interesting ideas. And of course, Veek is actually one of the people who always responds to discussion in these episodes. So, you can definitely look at the comments section for that. But I would say, when it comes to the air inflection, I would definitely say that like air should probably be a secondary or indeed a tertiary branch, really, all in this kind of paradigm that I'm laying out. So, some kind of mechanized or heavier, more powerful, more potent ground or mixed branch would probably be the secondary branch, and it would be more military minded and less support minded, with the tertiary branch being the most support minded. So I guess in this case, you would imagine the Reatons would have bio as their primary branch, and then they would have some kind of power branch as their secondary branch that would be, in one instance, it maybe be things like the siege tank, right? The phalanx. It may be things like, the Goliath or the Madrigal. And then the tertiary branch would probably have things like the cleric and the shaman. It would probably also have things, indeed, like the Trojan and the Antseal. Like those kinds of ideas applied to the Reatons would definitely be, you'd see teching into early tier tertiary branch stuff as the supportive options, early tier power branch stuff as, pivotal units you want to try to take decisive fights with in the early stages of the game, or you can just try to rely on your chaff, either to play more defensively, to be a bit more harass oriented, and maybe, you can mix and match. You can choose chaff and power, and that means that you're probably going to be trying some early aggro. You can choose chaff and support, which means maybe you're going to be raiding, maybe you're going to be just trying to hold on and defend. You can maybe even go for power and support, which might be specifically like some kind of greed opener where you're trying to do some kind of fast expansion and your chaff isn't going to really hold it because you're not going to have enough money for it. So you're sinking your investments into very particular options. That sounds more like what I'm all about. I'll also say I'm not 100% sure about this. I think I might be a little bit softer in the idea that you might need one key structure to access all other key structures. I typically don't really like this idea. Like basically what I'm getting at is like, what if the spawning pool is required for the Hydra? Is it actually called Hydralisk Den? I think it is, right? I'm thinking StarCraft 1 terms. The spawning pool is required for the Hydralisk Den and the lair. Like, I don't like that really. I don't like barracks required for factory. But it doesn't, I almost wonder if maybe my objection to it is more stylistic and thematic and less actually significant. Like, I do think that it does make early build orders very rigid, but that might not be as bad of a thing as I initially condemned it for. And it might more so be that I've shifted in my position where I can see the utility in having rigid opening build orders, even though they're not very exciting when it comes to like team games, and they reduce the amount of variety that you can have. Sometimes that early variety is actually overblown, and we've seen that in various stages of Cosmonarchy's development. Back in the Hydra days when we had 4 branches and it was impossible to figure out what your enemy was doing, and then we would speed up the economy, and then suddenly they could do everything else. In fact, one thing that some of the homies might not know, the old school homies who have been around for a while, they will remember at one point we had I forget which kind of update it was. It might have been the Premonition patch, but there was a big update at one point before it was Cosmonarchy. So I guess it must have been before Premonition as well, where we sped the economy up, but we still had 4 branches, and people were just dying to every fucking cheese imaginable because you just couldn't scout your enemy. And so you didn't have any stability for like what exactly you might be doing. This wasn't the point where we added 6 workers or set it to 6 worker starts and 100 minerals. That was done way before, but we sped up like harvest time or something like that, and we made it so that it definitely changed. This is years ago now, like 2+ years ago. So this is way before any tournaments were happening and stuff. But like the cheeses were off the charts, or not really even cheeses, just like early game shenanigans. It was just impossible to figure out the timing for, where previously it was possible because the game was slower paced. So then we increased the game's pace, but then everything fell apart. So then we slowed the game's pace down and took away some of the options, and things got a lot more settled. And that was still back in the era where you just needed the pool to unlock the Nather core. So, that was the early Ascensions and stuff, right? And generally through the entirety of Ascensions. I think Ascension 7 might still have not had the Vornath Pond. I'm pretty sure, actually, yeah. I think the Ascension 7 was, Ascension 7 was Hepsea's first tournament. So, yeah, that was definitely a case where he was still gaming. And so that was still like pool into Nath was still an option. So that was wild, dude. That was such a wild time. That was also pool into Vorv was an option too. Anyway, I'm kind of burying the lead on this question, but what I'm basically trying to get at is I can respect the idea that you want tech pacing to be a bit more intact in the early stages of the game, and I paid lip service to that with the idea of the gateway into Grand Library stuff, like the Tier 1 into Tier 2 stuff for Protoss. I think that's fine. I do, however, think I still don't really align with the idea that you want to restrict funnel all choices down to an initial acquisition. I think that's pretty boring. So it's just a question of, do you have enough time and pace in the early game to actually scout your opponent and see which early choice did they do? And maybe not having more than 2 early choices might be a good idea as well. And by 2 early choices, I guess it would be 3, because you could always try to go for some eco opener. But what I mean is, like, is your first military thing bio or mech? Not bio, mech, or air, because like star pad openers are not a real thing for Terran and Cosmonarchy right now. And that's fine. Like, those are meted out as opposed to being restricted in terms of tech. But I wouldn't really care that much if you needed to go stockade into Starpad or something like that, right? If you needed stockade or fulcrum to access the Starpad, I actually wouldn't care about that. It wouldn't really fit the current paradigm of stuff. Like, what would that mean? That maybe when you access Tier 2, you would need a captaincy or a mantle to unlock a starport? Like, if you're going to try to make that a pattern, that doesn't really track. But like, as an isolated example, forgetting about the rules that it might instantiate, I don't actually think that would be a terrible idea, because you still have mech or bio that you can go to, right? So anyway, going back to Myrian's question, Reatons would definitely have a lot about them that would be different and more hinging on bio as like a common thing, and you would pretty much always make bio. Even if it wasn't your opener, you might still have some cases where you would open power. I'm using power instead of mech here. So like chaff, power, support, you would still have cases where you'd open power, but I think they'd be much more reserved. They would be meta, but they'd in an ideal scenario. But they, opening, like sort of like how you can sometimes open lattice as Protoss, but most of the time you open gateway. I think that's probably a good way to go about it. And I feel like that strikes a good balance. So I'm not really sure about the state of Zerg in the current Cosmonarchy, so I can't comment on if they fit that idea as well, because I think pool units seem to be struggling a lot from what people are telling me. I still have good success with them, but, I'm me, and I play very differently than everybody else, apparently. So who knows about that one? But figured I would just go ahead and shed some more light on an interesting idea that I had there. I took way too much time on that question, so we're going to jump straight into Enozlliks' question. Enozlliks asks, you are presented with a button, and if you press it, you will gain the ability to stop and start time at will. However, there's a small chance each day for time to stop without you choosing for it to happen, and it can go from being stopped for any length of time between 5 seconds and 5 years. You can't resume it during the time frame chosen. Will you press the button? Okay, so let me fully understand this idea. I gain the ability to stop and start time at will, but there's a small chance each day for time to stop without me choosing it for it to happen. So I'm assuming that during this time when time stops, I am still free to do whatever. And I'm also assuming, for the sake of argument, that I can use the internet, and like time doesn't stop in the context of me not being able to like use basic appliances, like electricity still works, and like, because it's not really possible for time to stop, but you to continue moving, because then like, does oxygen stop moving? Well, then I would just fucking suffocate, right? So, there's like all of this stuff that you'd have to like kind of dismiss as like, okay, that's not actually related to the idea. The idea or the essence of the question seems to be kind of like Click, that shitty Adam Sandler movie, where you like push the pause button and you can then do whatever you want to do. You can like slap a guy or fart in his face or eat food or whatever. You rob a bank, whatever the case may be. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I would definitely want to be able to know if time had stopped. Like I would hope that I would have some kind of built-in, if I press this button and time stopped apropos of nothing between 5 seconds and 5 years, if I had the ability to know that time is stopped and this is about how long it will be stopped for. The 5 years part is really difficult, isn't it? Because like, I think without being able to communicate with other humans for 5 years, even for like, not 5, I wouldn't go crazy after 5 days, but like it wouldn't take 5 years for you to go crazy under those circumstances. So I think that time frame is way too punishing, because I think you do need to talk with other people. You do need to bounce, you're not like a solo node in a network. I mean, you are a node in a network. You're not like isolated, right? And so, yeah, I feel like I definitely can't say that I can do that. I definitely cannot do that. I have to be able to, know that it's just going to be 5 seconds or 5 days. And even that would be quite debilitating, but that I could get behind. I think anything longer than that, cause like 5 seems to be the number here. Anything longer than 5 days, I wouldn't be able to do 5 weeks. I wouldn't be able to do 5 months. Like that's a long time. Maybe I could stretch 5 weeks, but if it's like random and it's each day, assuming like if it's 5 weeks or whatever, it's like after that amount of time, the clock starts on another day. Like I think, yeah, not having precise control over it would definitely be a problem. I've actually thought about this a lot. Not the counterfactual of like, okay, now you can't control it. But I've thought about like, what if I could just pause reality, do all of the things I wanted to do, and then unpause reality and be able to do whatever. Like I've thought about that so much, because time is so important and so finite. It feels like obviously that would age me quite a bit, because I'd still continue to age and eat and do all these things. Like, I'd eat food and I'd exercise and I'd, whatever the case, sleep probably. While I'd have to make sure to unpause the sleep during sleep or whatever. So, so that everybody else can continue their fucking lives. I guess like the sun wouldn't go down though. So like, that's another thing. Like the time of day would be the same. Yeah. I think maybe that would still be possible, but like what I'm getting at is that would be, I've thought about that because I fantasized about being able to do that in the same way that I fantasized about being able to put up like a reality bubble and then be able to make as much noise as I want and like not disturb any other person, because like I do a lot of casting and I do a lot of video recording and I talk loudly in general and a lot in general. And so, yeah, I've thought about that as well. So like it's funny that like my TISM has made me think of stuff like that. And so that's kind of weird to have somebody else ask me a question that part of that question I have, especially when I was younger, like aggressively fantasized about like, yeah, what if I could do that? But I think in practice, I'm not sure I'd be able to say, yes, I would push the button, even if there was no random chance for anything else to happen, because can I be trusted with this power? Like, and not because I'm going to take advantage of other people, but more so like, will I not just like pause and do a bunch of shit and forever lose myself in like working on one thing? Like, yes, the value proposition of having infinite time to do whatever you wanted to do is very, very attractive. But part of what motivates somebody into action is not actually having enough time to do everything that they want. Otherwise, you're probably going to reach choice paralysis. And I feel like I felt that where I say I take a week off of shift work and I know I don't really have anything other than the work that I'm going to do for the game or D&D prep or whatever. Those are the things that I have to do. Well, like the deadline for D&D prep is something to work around. But other than that, I just have infinite time, like to do whatever I want to do. Well, I guess I'll do something. Like there's not as much impetus. There's not as much animus to actually do something. And so I definitely think that that's an underrated aspect of life is actually having limits to what you can accomplish because of the time frame. So there you go. That's my answer to you, Enozlliks. Interesting question. Thank you. So we are actually going to revisit the Shambler's question from the previous episode because I spent a long time trying to figure out what he meant, and didn't really run with any one interpretation until sort of the tail end. So the Shambler actually wrote a clarifying comment, and I'm going to answer that, and then he actually has a separate question for this actual episode, so I'm going to double up on the Shambler stuff, and then we have 3Crow and Lucy to answer afterwards. So we still have a couple of questions here to get through, but I'm just going to be letting you guys know we're going to be answering that Psychic FTL Hijack Genetic Engineering video game Part 2. You are on your own planet, and for one reason or another, you have psychic abilities. You, perhaps with the assistance of other psychics of your race, identify another sentient species on a planet many light years away. In order to, quote, travel to this planet, since faster than light is possible in this universe, and this planet is presumably far enough away that generation ships are impractical, you have to dominate and or destroy the mind of one of the beings on this planet so you can possess their body. Once you have done this, you are subject to all the strange stimuli and foreign sensations of this alien form, and thus are at the very least uncomfortable, if not outright in agony, for the duration of your possession. So in order to alleviate the suffering, you must build a new body that matches your original biology on this new world for you to transfer your mind into. Okay, so again, going back to his original question, he was asking if that was the premise for a video game, what would be some mechanics? I was struggling to imagine a situation where you could turn something like that into an RTS game. Because I think if you were going to have that be an RTS game, then I guess you could possess like leaders of a command structure. Well, actually, one thing that could be kind of interesting is if all of the sentient species that the members of that sentient species on a planet far away that were possessed were actually leaders of that sentient species, and they the human factions that dominated them were actually at war with each other on Earth or like in human controlled space. And that would be actually kind of a neat twist. Imagine that, like you see this like alien world, and an alien species is at war with itself, and there's like different factions and stuff. And then like a sequel to that game could be, at the end of the game's story or whatever, it's like implied or revealed or whatever that there's a force dominating them, and that's like kind of the one of the ideas is like, oh damn, like what the hell, they're being dominated by some other mind, because like maybe there'd be like an undominated faction of this alien species that would be playable, and then there'd be an alien species aligned to this Earth faction and an alien species aligned to that Earth faction, and like it would almost look like it's cloaked in religiosity, because maybe it has to be, because they can only dominate the leaders or some of the leaders, and so those charismatic leaders have to be like the best and brightest of humankind or whatever back at home, and so that could be kind of interesting. So maybe you could still make it about an RTS game. The question is like, is that just window dressing on the setting? I think it would have to be, because I don't really know what you could do that wouldn't be really annoying or not my style for RTS game. Like, imagine the ability to possess individual units to empower them, but then you have like top bar abilities or something, god powers that you can throw at the battlefield at a moment's notice, and that is definitely not my style. I say god powers, it's not a reference to Age of Mythology. I actually know nothing about Age of Mythology, but I think people said that there's god powers in it. I was actually thinking about just top bar abilities, like I know that technically it was a sidebar ability in Command & Conquer 3. I wasn't super much of a fan of that, because some of it was straight up like spawning units at a location. Some of it was like killing all infantry at this location. It was great, dude. And it's like instant cast. There's no wind up or anything. It's just suddenly infantry are dead here. What the fuck? And there's shit like that, right? Super weapons, etc. But I'm also thinking of Stormgate and Immortal Gates of Pyre both have top bar abilities. At least I think maybe Stormgate only has it for some races, and I think Zero Space has it for some races, factions, whatever they call them. So that's also weird. Anyway, yeah, that would make some sense tying in with the setting, but I hate those. And I can't even imagine a way that I would try to make them good. Like, they typically seem to just end up being like, what would you describe it as? It would feel to me like the way that you've got this sort of thing set up is that it's no different than I don't know, like the idea of just being able to click something, even if you built it and researched it, like in Command & Conquer 3, where you have to build certain structures to unlock certain powers and research certain upgrades to unlock certain powers and whatever. That was at least like somewhat acceptable, because you could deny that by destroying the structure. But like the fact that you can just deploy this anywhere, I mean, that's my argument against scanner sweep, right? It's like you build this thing and then it affects the entire map without, like, I know some people, somebody's typing this comment right now. They're not really, but somebody's typing this comment. You build this thing, and then across the entire map, the diadem strikes your enemies for free. That's very different. But like scanner sweep is literally a global ability. You just click anywhere on the map. It's not actually geolocated or at all. It's not guarded or on, because obviously the diadem has a very high range, but it's not so ridiculous that it's like literally global. It's not even close. So yeah. I don't know. I have to think a little bit more about that. I think overall, I'm not a fan of those kinds of top bar abilities. So I don't really know how I'd turn that part into it. Like, because Shambler's question was about mechanics. Like, what would you mechanistically have that's different? And I think maybe there would be some way to like choose, like declare as a chosen one of the units that you could train. I just don't know how you would do that without the top bar ability part. And I mean, like, maybe it could be a top bar ability thing, but it would be like deploying it, and then there would be a long wind up time. Like, it would almost be like a Zerg mutation where they turn into another unit via an egg. And then that chrysalis metamorphosis thing would be something that would happen over a period of time and require resources. But it's like, yeah, maybe it's just like a global thing that you can do to all of your units. You can like specify a unit and then, possess them, give them holy possession, whatever you would call it, based on that. And so maybe you could still do that and it wouldn't be a top bar ability at all. It would just be like, that's how we discuss like, mutating the unit or whatever. And when it emerges from its chrysalis, it is, empowered in some way. And so I guess the idea would be that maybe that would be one. So like Ascendancy, maybe that would even be the name of the RTS game, would be like, okay, you've got you've got your units. Like, one of the factions can do this sort of thing similar to Zerg, where they have their units be able to be mutated into a new version of the unit, but that mutation is considered like Holy Ascendancy for that particular case. And then there'd be like a different faction that found different technology to unshackle their psychic powers back in the home planet, and that is a different way to achieve Ascendancy, right? So there'd be many paths to divinity, many paths of ascendancy. That's basically the idea that would be going on inside the setting. So I guess that's probably what I would try to do if I was going to make it an RTS. If I was going to make it anything else, I don't really immediately know. I think maybe it would almost be like, you could make like a boomer shooter out of that, where instead of having different weapons, you're actually possessing different people. So when you switch to a weapon, you're actually switching to a different agent. That would be kind of interesting. I don't really know how you would do that. Maybe it would be like a multi-form thing. That would be like the form that has been made by they've made this form for you to possess, and you possess it. And now it's more than, just a human form. It's something greater. It's something evolved. I don't know. There could be something like that, but that again almost feels a little bit like window dressing and not really affecting the game. Like, being able to upgrade every single unit into an ascendant form, being able to ascend every single unit in some way, shape, or form, that feels more like a transformative mechanic. And again, it might not sound that way because I just gave the example of that Zerg use, but if every race can do that and every unit can do that, like every unit has an ascendant form associated with it, I think that is a very different value proposition, because like Hydralisk turns into Bactylisk, it's like a different unit like combat role, and there's a different value proposition to, like, sometimes you want Hydras, sometimes you want Bactylisks, right? And usually you want some kind of mix. And then if you think about the idea of like what I'm talking about, it would be more like if you could ascend your Hydralisk into a hunter killer, like, which is like the hero name from StarCraft 1, stuff like that. Like, if you could basically turn your unit into not a hero unit, because hero units have a different context, but like just a super version of itself, there would be more interesting things than just stats that would change. Like, maybe it would get a different passive, or maybe the ascension actually would be contingent on something else. Like, maybe you could customize what benefits ascended units get. Like, you could upgrade something that you could then unupgrade in order to change back or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that you could probably try to do, but that's probably how I would try to approach it from an RTS standpoint. So hopefully that is more satisfactory to the Shambler. I especially like the idea of ending the main story on the reveal. Like, you have the faction 1, which is a controlled faction. You have their campaign, faction 2, their campaign, faction 3, their campaign. And then like the fourth faction, or whatever the final faction would be the one that's not actually dominated. And is still like native, actually fully native, and maybe they even have to like deal with interlopers and intruders who have been dominated or whatever, and they like find them, smoke them out, or what have you, and somehow, and then being able to like maybe they would have, instead of ascending like the other factions do, they would have something else that allows them to compete, but they would not be able to ascend. That would be like their key difference or whatever. Or maybe they would have like their own variant of that. Anyway, that would be like an interesting thing, and then have them reveal that, oh shit, that it's not just, ascendancy in the context of holiness. There's something going on here. And it would be even more epicer, which is not a word, if you could go from that into the idea of like, imagine a situation where, the humans actually arrive in force on the planet, even though FTL was sort of like not possible within the setting. That would be a logical step for like the sequel game would actually feature straight up humans, or maybe it wouldn't have to, but that would be like an idea. If you wanted to make a sequel game, you could do something like that. All right, so that is the answer to the first Shambler question. The second Shambler question is all about the Askosi. The entire Askosi race are teleported into the superconstruct of Pangea. How do they situate themselves within the new setting, assuming they survive? I actually think the Askosi might be able to survive. Obviously, I did mention in some previous prototype episode that Pangea, like, the superconstruct has different, like a different internal atmosphere, and it's obviously different depending on where you are inside the superconstruct, but it's it's not going to be like hospitable to all life. But the Askosi should actually be able to make do thanks to their cybernetic implants, and they are pretty like they're nominally resistant to like gravitational fluctuations in terms of like how heavy the gravity is or how light the gravity is. Like they should be able to adapt to that as well. I think that their technology would definitely help them out here. The question again comes back to the idea of like, can they make, because I talked about Cosmonarchy Terrans in Pangea and how they would have limited munitions. And no, I think I was talking about Ansifi, but the same would apply to Cosmonarchy Terrans as well. It's like the materials that you can harvest in Pangea are not as advanced as they are in Chrysilient, as they are in Xibalba, as they are in Onatar. Like these are more curated materials that were put here for some reason, but they do not generate spaceship caliber materials or whatever, right? So the Askosi would be knocked down a peg in terms of their critical power. Like that's why in Pangea they don't have fleets of the same caliber, for a reference, right? You don't have giant space fleets in Pangea. You might have like fighters and stuff, but they're more like they're almost more like helicopters and biplanes and stuff than they are like more conventional plane, like as opposed to like actual spacecraft that can go into orbit or whatever. So yeah, they're very different, and they're usually fuel minded because there's a very large distance between objects in Pangea, right? Anyway, that all said, it's a very different gap in technology. So the Askosi would probably pretty easily dominate everything nearby, similar to Terrans from Chrysilient and similar to, the Ansifi or whatever from Xibalba. There would definitely be aspects of that would be true. I just think after you get situated, you're probably looking at a situation where the Askosi would have to adapt to the surroundings and the materials that they can harvest. I think there's probably, if the entire Askosi race was sent in, they would probably become the most populous race within Pangea. So I think that alone would give them a lot of value, especially since they have these relic weapons that would instantly be at relic status, since they'd be irreplaceable, unreproducible, and still, quite powerful, right? Of course, FTL travel is, FTL travel is possible, but it's more like teleportation, and it's less like punching through the universe, space-time wise. So that would just end up getting them destroyed, probably. So yeah, I guess it would really depend on what the Askosi would do. I would think that probably what they would see is they would probably be able to conquer the whole place. The question is, how long can they hold that conquer without eventually expending all of their limited resources, right? And how soon do they realize that they cannot reproduce what they're trying to go for, and all that stuff. So I'll tentatively say that they would rule over Pangea within a few generations. And then they would probably have that rule going for a very long time. And then eventually it would probably, I don't know what they would do on a societal level to avoid the inevitable collapse because they can't go back to their home setting, and they also can't actually create the advanced technology that they're used to, right? They'd have to generate some other kinds of technology. And I don't actually think that they have the genetic makeup to benefit from the aspects of Pangea's setting that allow for more arcane, powerful displays of, the way that the other races within Pangea are able to, because those races of Pangea were, like, Pangea was in some ways made for those races. And so having another race that doesn't have the same makeup would probably mean that they wouldn't extinguish the other races. Not that that would even be in the character of the Askosi as a species in the first place, but they would probably win in conventional warfare. They would just not be able to, they wouldn't be able to replicate like the teleportation parts and other such phenomenon that are present within Pangea. So that is my answer for that question. Almost done. We got Three Crows' question here. He asks about proposed changes to the Mind Tyrant. Specifically, he asks, can you discuss your thoughts on the current state and possible changes for the Mind Tyrant? So let me take a look at the Mind Tyrant as it currently stands, since he asked about the current state of it. I feel like the Mind Tyrant is particularly useful in PvP if your enemy is going for individual power units. We talked about those early skirmishes where, in the previous answer for Myrian, I was making reference to the whole, like, if you have 2 to 3 architects kind of vibe. I would say, basically, if you have 2 Mind Tyrants to their 3 architects, you can basically disable and control all of their architects. However, it is a, like, basically the idea of it is a 2-second stun, right? So the Mind Tyrant is very vulnerable during this. It's like over the time span of 2 seconds, the unit that is the victim of the Mind Tyrant can still be controlled. Also, there's the projectile travel time in there, which probably needs to be accounted for, but it's pretty fast overall. It's actually like, it's almost instantaneous, believe it or not. I don't think many people used the new Mind Tyrant tyranny, and so it's probably a little bit hard for them to believe, but the architect will get like 1 shot off before it's controlled in that sense. And so it is one of those things that does take some getting used to. It does take positioning. It does take APM. And so, yeah, it's definitely, it also requires you to kill the unit in order to actually take command of it, which is a separate issue, right? When you're in a situation where you would be able to succeed in doing all of those things, the Mind Tyrant would obviously be very, very useful. You're talking about entirely stunning a unit as long as it remains within 8 range. The problem is that many of the units you would probably want to stun historically have had more range than 8, or if they've had equivalent range, or maybe they've had slightly less range, but you're still within the threat zone, practically speaking. Okay, so we're talking about the Mind Tyrant, we're talking about Tyranny. Tyranny is healthier for the game now because it's not just an instant seize, but it is one of those things that that asset transfer aspect of it that doesn't. There's nothing about the game anymore that like lets you just straight up transfer an asset. You have to destroy the asset in order to take it for yourself. So yes, there is still that aspect of maybe a runaway effect where you kill the enemy so they lose a unit, but then you also gain their unit. But that's still better and healthier than them just straight up losing their unit without you earning it through damaging it to death. So that part of it is healthier. I also like the idea stylistically that the Mind Tyrant is something that dominates individual units. I thought about this for a while. The Demiurge got this aura because it's like, in the past, this mechanic was kind of flipped, where the Mind Tyrant would be able to control many units, but the Demiurge would be able to control individual units because it would focus fire. Now the Demiurge is more about controlling many units that, it deems worthy enough by gracing them with its presence, which is still quite thematically consistent with what the Demiurge is all about, and less about controlling individual units, while the Mind Tyrant is much more individual focused. The problem is that the Mind Tyrant, I would say, especially considering it's 200 Vespi and it's from a tier 3 production structure and locks it up for 40 seconds, no less, it's probably not a good value prop to add Tyranny to your army because it's APM, and then it's APM to cast it and further APM to stand in the area so that you can make use of the ability. it seems like a unit that if you had really good APM, you probably still end up losing the Mind Tyrant because of focus fire from other such units. I don't think you can field it versus Terran armies that are fielding Phalanx or Eidolons, so that's all Terran armies. And I'm not sure it's very useful versus Zerg because they have so many units that I guess you could use Maelstrom, right? Because it does slow units for 50% for 4 seconds, and then it also takes the hostile corpses of the area and converts them into an attack speed slow, or attack speed buff rather, for your allies. And so that can be situationally useful versus Terran armies that are fielding Apostles and Zerg armies that are fielding Matroleths. I'm not so sure that it's useful in the context of just straight up being able to slow movement speed, because it's only movement speed. It's not an attack speed debuff. So it's only a movement speed debuff. It's only for 4 seconds. The website says it's only for 2 range. I'm imagining that's like 2 squared range, which is actually like 4 range. So I don't know. I'd have to actually test that. But it being a high energy cost as well, I'm pretty sure at least some of this stuff is actually out of date, because 150 energy for that ability does not quite pass muster as a sniff test type of deal. But it does look like it is indeed that much. So I'm just going to quickly cast it to see if it's actually slowing in only 2 range. And it looks like it's a little bit more judicious than that. Yeah, it's a little bit more than that, I think. But anyway, either way, it's like a very potent, ability in theory, and yet it requires so much energy. It's a slow projectile, right? It slows stuff by 4 seconds by 50%. Like, this can be argued as being pretty useful as like a unit that allows you to control the pace of the engagement. But I think I like that it's a skill shot with Maelstrom, and I like that Tyranny has a component of it that is a channel. I think all of that stuff is pretty good. Maybe one of the things that we could try to do is, because Mind Tyrants now come online so late into the game with the tech tree changes to Protoss, we could think about making Tyranny an instantaneous stun, because there is still that 1 second channel instead of the slow over time. And then we would maybe make it so that now you're basically using the Mind Tyrant to isolate individual units, and it's almost like a microstasis, right? You're pinging individual units with the Mind Tyrant, you hopefully using its 8 range to good effect, and then those units are no longer going to be in the fight. And then, again, if the Tyrant is not within 8 range, then the unit is unstunned. But all in all, I think that would be a pretty good option for at least being able to be a combat disruptor, which currently is not, like, that seems like the intended role for the Mind Tyrant if you're just a dispassionate observer, and it is the intended role, but it's not really serving that up. So I think one change to Tyranny that would be good is giving it the ability to instantaneously stun targets. The other change that would probably be good is somehow retooling Maelstrom to be a little bit more interesting. I will say, stunning a target almost instantaneously, in this case after a 1 second channel, that can feel really powerful and debilitating on the other end of it. And so I think we should probably reduce the cast range of Tyranny, similar to how we've, reduced like the cast range of Psystorm. Like the cast range of Psystorm is less than the leash range of Psystorm for it to be preserved. The Mind Tyrant should probably have like a 6 cast range on Tyranny and an 8 range on the leash or something like that, right? If we're going to try to be technical with those kinds of details. I think that would probably be fine. And if we go for something like that, then you're in a situation where the Mind Tyrant still has to get up close and personal in order to stun individual targets, but maybe then the Mind Tyrant needs more durability. Maybe the Mind Tyrant needs a bit more mobility, or, like survivability in general, which I view as like some sort of nexus between mobility and durability, because, you can take more hits or you can dodge in and out of combat, and either one is like a boon to your ability to survive. So as we're really looking at this unit, I think it's a ways off of being a great addition to your army, because it does nothing passively. And that's another thing. The Mind Tyrant has no weapon. The Mind Tyrant has no aura. The Mind Tyrant has active abilities, one of which is a cool idea on paper, but most of the time you're never going to be in a situation where just stunning 1 or 2 units is going to make a big difference in the battle. And the other of which is probably just a little bit undervalued, I guess understated would be a way to describe it. It's not, it's underdetermined, right? We talk about overdetermined, where something is always the right choice, because even if you took some good things away from it, it would still be the best choice. Yeah, it's like you have to buff a few things about Maelstrom to make it a good choice or the best choice. And I don't necessarily want to make it the best choice. I just want to make it a good choice. So it looks like it needs a couple of things like that to be nudged in that way. Now, we're talking about nothing passively happening to the Mind Tyrant. And, you know, the Cantavis is like that too. The Cantavis is a storm and then hallucination. Those are its two abilities. It doesn't have a passive. It doesn't have anything about it that when you use it, it will, you know, do something special just by existing. Whereas like the Matrolith has its aura, and the Shaman has its healing, and, you know, the Antseal has the aura, very small aura around itself. You know, there's things like that that I think are worth considering for that sort of thing, right? So should the Mind Tyrant get something passive, or should it maintain this sort of like focus of your APM? I think that's an open question. I could imagine a world where the Mind Tyrant gains something when it has an active tyranny link to another target. I'd have to look at the code base to see if individual Mind Tyrants are considered that way, or if we could maybe just say like, hey, a Mind Tyrant is, you know, a unit is being tyrannized right now, therefore the Mind Tyrant gets some kind of benefit. Like it could straight up just give it some armor, right? Like you could imagine a world where they gain, you know, maybe when we eventually hook everything that we need to hook for adding temporary HP or something, you know, we could see a world where like the shields go up by 25 for every dominated unit, and you know, stuff like that. And by that, I mean like every stunned unit. So like during the stun part, the Mind Tyrant would get some kind of benefit. And maybe also being around dominated units, tyrannized units, would buff it in some other way as well. Maybe the Demiurge should get some buff for being around dominated units. You know, I'm open to that idea as well. The question is just like, what should the Mind Tyrant get, you know, for that association? So I think short term, making it so that the Mind Tyrant has more survivability, tyranny stuns immediately instead of the ramping slow, and Maelstrom is just better. Those three changes will probably make the Mind Tyrant more interesting, attractive, perhaps powerful enough to be used by good players in genuine circumstances. I think all of those things could be the case if we made those three changes to the unit, but I suspect we would need to give good players a different reason to field the Mind Tyrant, by which I mean we might need to work on something passive that is provided. Like Storm is just damage, so you can kind of think of Storm as being the attack for the Cantavis, and it does give you a lot of value for the click. Didact Stasis, pretty fucking good for obvious reasons. And then, you know, you think about Recall as well, pretty good for obvious reasons. So it doesn't, and it does technically have a passive, right? It has Shroud of Adun. So, you know, maybe the Mind Tyrant could do something passively, like maybe the Mind Tyrant could provide the armor penetration aura that the Manifold and the Barghest provide in combat. So that could be like another echo of that particular design, where its concurring chorus is the passive for the Manifold, right? And so if you imagine something like, you know, the Mind Tyrant has some kind of passive where either after using an ability or just generally speaking, I don't know. There's something, yeah, there's definitely something about that like is somewhat attractive to me, that maybe it just provides that passive with no condition. I think that would be an interesting thing to explore. And so that would be a little bit less about combat disruption and a little bit more about buffing your own army. But, you know, I could see a world where that's something that gets added to it, where it's a buff aura. I could see a world where it debuffs enemy units simply by existing. And that could be an aspect of its power fantasy, where maybe it's like, it could be as simple as that, like all units within an aura around the Mind Tyrant are affected by Signify Cowardice, which slows their movement speed. That would be pretty powerful. At that point, I don't know what you would use Maelstrom for. But like, then now you're like, doing that just by moving the unit closer. That might be a little bit too one note. I don't know. It's not very, maybe that's not as interesting. Maybe you should need to do something in order to proc that. Like maybe if you proc the seizure of a unit by killing a tyrannized unit, then that gives you some kind of bonus where it spreads Signify or something. That might be a little bit too mixing too many things at once, right? That might be throwing too much at the unit. But you know, there's a couple of things we could try to do to reinforce the idea that this unit is, you know, meant to be part of your arsenal. And so some of those are low impact changes, like giving it more durability, making Tyranny stun, giving it some kind of aura that's beneficial to your army, making Maelstrom better. Those 4 changes, I think, would definitely make the Mind Tyrant an attractive option. Will we be able to get all of them done in an agreeable manner before the tournament? I'm not sure, but that is a unit I will try to do. And I mentioned the Cataphract earlier. I mentioned the Evigorlisk and a Criminalisk earlier. I mentioned just updating a couple of units earlier. Well, the Mind Tyrant is one of those units. So hopefully 3Crow feels satisfied with my breakdown. I know it's not an awesome unit right now. I want it to be very awesome. All right, so that closes us out with Lucifirius's question, which is not actually a question. He says, not a question, but a request for Dungeons and Dragons leaks. So an update for the public about the D&D adventure. So the D&D adventure is called the Paladin Partner. Shout out to Benjamin Tyberski. So actually we have some pretty cool stuff going on there. We've got 3Crow as a Paladin. We've got Lucifirius as a Warlock. We've got the Shambler as a Druid. Who doesn't know he's a Druid? It's a long story. And we've got my brother as a Bard. And the Bard is a Kenku. The Warlock, Lucifirius's character, is an Elf. And the other 2 are humans. And so far, they have gotten into a tavern brawl with each other and some of the other homies that were just in the bar, and started getting very antsy. And that took about 2 hours out of the first session. The last hour of that first session was spent kind of trying to figure out where they were going to go next, and then figure out like what they wanted to do before they set off for the road, because the pitch for this idea was that 3Crow's character, the Paladin, is on his own personal quest to deliver supplies to the Order of Lathandar, that is, aspects of the Order of Lathandar that are scattered around the different cities and towns in the northern region of this continent that I've brewed up myself, homebrew. And so basically, that's what is going on with that Paladin. And so he recruits the other 3 party members to join him. And after their tavern brawl stuff, they eventually were able to leave. They go out, they leave, they travel to the road. They have an encounter with bandits. They see a wrecked caravan that had been, had been plundered, and the people who had been attempting to defend it or operate it were slain. And so, and they don't know if there's on the status of any prisoners or whatever. And so then they decide to go investigating, and then they get and by the way, the bandit encounter was the second session. They didn't make it that far in the first session. So the second session, they go investigating. In addition to investigating, they send 2 men back. The druid and the warlock go back home to the town that they had just left to try to secure additional muscle. And they bring with them some 2 members of the bandits that had been subdued and interrogated, and given them some leads about this bandit organization called Ibnar's Arms, which is also homebrew. I don't think there's anything named that anyway. And so that is one of those things that I think I think the characters have been enjoying the homebrew stuff. The characters have been enjoying exploring what's going on with this bandit team, because they've definitely been mostly dealing with them. And then things have just gotten more and more weird. While the 2 homies are heading to the town to try to recruit more men and people, basically more arms to deal with Ibnar's Arms, my brother's character, the Bard, and 3Crow's character, the Paladin, move into a forest, and in that forest they encounter giant spiders, and they barely survive an encounter with one of the giant spiders. Up until that point, they had mostly been able to, they resisted the poison. They didn't get nicked by too many of the other spiders, the smaller ones, and then the giant spider attacks, and it's at the very last moment, it one-shots the Paladin down to not a death state, but a dying state, he's downed. And I think it one-shot. He might have taken 1 point of damage and then got max rolled into, I think he had 11 health, and it did 11 damage to him. But that was really inspiring to me, or useful to me as a DM, because it indicated how powerful these creatures actually are when it comes to their attack rolls. And up until that point, they had kind of been running around it and avoiding taking damage. And it was down to 1 HP itself, or 2 HP or something crazy. at that point, it had a sudden surge of vitality and struck its mandibles into the paladin and severely injured his shoulders, bringing him all the way down to no health. And suddenly he was down, and my brother was like the only one there, and had to, kill the spider. And like, by the way, while this is happening, the, Lucifirius and the Shambler are like, oh shit, you're going to die. You're all dead. What's happening? Like they're reacting, mostly Shambler to be fair, but, they're all reacting and like watching with, bated breath, like, what's going to happen to these guys? Are they going to have to roll new characters or what? But they do manage to barely survive. My brother resuscitates the paladin, and, they get on their feet, they investigate the spider. They find out that the spider has some kind of magical sigil inscribed on its body that seems to have been glowing with magic up until the point where the creature died. And they're not really sure what that means, but that sigil turns out to be the same sigil that was on the armor of the brigands that attacked them. Therefore, they conclude that Ibnar's arms is somehow capable of controlling the spiders themselves. And what's going on with this, with these bandits that are able to control monsters of this nature? That's crazy. And of course, my brother tries to lure one of the spiders all the way home to the caravan where they rest and wait in an attempt to recover some health and lick their wounds and wait for the two other homies, Lucy and Shambler's characters, to return with their haul. And their haul is 3 paladins, or 2 paladins and a cleric from the Temple of Lathandar that pledged their services so long as they could be armored and armed. They come armored, but they didn't have any weapons. And so the weapons that had been taken by the bandits were given to them in exchange for their service. And so that's speaking to like more issues about the lands and the realm, where there's like a shortage on weapons and steel, and also a shortage of manpower. And so the guards don't send anything with them. So yeah, there's all sorts of really interesting things there. That was basically a quick summary of like the first 2 to 3 sessions. And, it ends with them regrouping, figuring out what's happening. There's some spider shenanigans where like the spider that had been lured to the caravan by my brother, my brother's character charges into to meet other spiders in the forest that are like watching them, and like there's some dialogue between them that can't be understood because nobody has Speak with Animals yet. And it seems like the spiders all relax and decide to slink back into the forest and pose no threat. And then, they start to explore things like tentatively, like not sure what's happening. And, like Shambler's character is trying his best to like tell everybody to wear the mark of Ibnar and use green paint that he had Lucifirius's character secure from one of the areas inside the town, and is like, yeah, we're going to use this green paint because green's their color, and their sigil will, inscribing their sigil will protect us from the spiders rather. And the paladins are like, I ain't using no damn fool bandit sigil. Get the fuck out of here, dude. Get the Lathandar out of here, dude. And I assume they don't swear. I don't know. They mostly haven't sworn so far. And so that's been a thing that has been going on with them. And so there's like tensions between Shambler's character, who's like practical and somewhat ruthless. And he's like trying to see what he can do there he's like, no, just use the sigil. Like, who cares about your pride when you might get mauled to death by a giant spider? And they're like, no, I shall face the giant spider because I am a paladin. And if the giant spider steps to me, I shall smite it. And, shit like that. And so it's been pretty entertaining to have all of that stuff going on. And it's my first time running a game, and people seem to be enjoying it. So I do look forward to where this game goes, and I look forward to when we decide to do another spin up another game, because it would be really cool to do that. If I didn't, like, I would. This sounds so fucking nerdy. Forgive me, anyone who doesn't realize that I am a nerd by now. But if I didn't have shift work and instead I just ran D&D games, that would be a great, brilliant side thing to do when I'm not playing or building, Cosmonarchy and playing it, admittedly, a lot more lately and all that stuff. So yeah, great shit. It's been a blast trying to get that happen. I think we might need like a Euro-friendly one at some point, and I'm not really sure who would be able to make it to that one, but I remember I was going to invite Veek, and I was going to invite Knight of the Realm, who's also Euro-oriented. He's from Kosovo. I think that's how you pronounce it. If you don't pronounce it the right way, you get mauled to death in Europe, so don't say it wrong. But yeah, cool shit. Cool shit, in my opinion. All great stuff. If there's interest in me discussing more of that, Maybe Lucifirius will use this, his next week's question, to also ask me to leak more info and do more of a plot synopsis / summary of more sessions. We're up to session 10, just happened yesterday as of the day of recording this. So yeah, that's one of those things where I might do more later, but that's your quick and dirty summary of the first 3 sessions. It was pretty fun and pretty interesting, and there's a hell of a lot more to come and a hell of a lot more to talk about than that. So I'm gonna call it there on the question. But hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Prototype and letting me know what you guys think about all of the things that I gabbed about in this 2-hour podcast in the comments below. Of course, if you disagree with anything I said about the game balance or whatever, let me know. Let me know your thoughts. If you think we're on the right track, I think we are. Let me know about that as well. Of course, tell me your favorite Cosmonarchy unit and why I should buff it. I might actually consider it if you give me a good reason. And tell me, of course, all about what you think about Acropolis 2. Overall, I would just say Cosmonarchy is fucking nice, and I'm glad that I was able to bring you this 69th episode of the show. Until episode 70 drops next week, and until you see the castovers coming up, GG.